A very warm welcome from SVKM International School to all the delegates present here. We at SVKM believe in the values of our rich Indian heritage. Therefore, in the long standing tradition of India, we share a philosophy of Atiti Devo Bhava, in that our guests are comparable to the Almighty. And today, we hope to embody that through welcoming you wholeheartedly and supporting you in this event at every level. Today, we are proud to host university counselors from across the globe and esteemed workshop leaders who are here to share their valuable expertise.
SVKM International School, as an institution, strives to shape its students in becoming successful global citizens. The school is committed to placing its students in the best of the university by endorsing in a transparent consultation process with both the parents and the students. Through a dedicated in-house career counseling and placement cell, we continue to proudly celebrate 100% university placement through our school each year.
Similarly, the International Career in College Counseling Conference, in its aim for a collaborative dialogue on issues that drive sustainable and inclusive counseling practices that are focused on student success, brings together higher education representatives to facilitate best practices. Thus, we consider it a privilege to host and contribute to this endeavor. To start the day's proceedings, we would like to call upon our principal, Dr. Swaminathan, to felicitate the dignitaries. We would like you all to welcome, with a loud applause, Mr. Clay Hensley, Senior Director, International Strategy and Outreach, College Board.
Please keep the applause going as we introduce to you Dr. John Wilkerson, Director of International Admissions, University of Indiana, Bloomington.
Dr. Zina Evans, Vice President, Enrollment Management and Associate Provost, University of Florida.
Mr. Adam Sapp, Assistant Vice President, Admissions for Pomona College.
And of course, Mr. John Gaines, Director of Undergraduate Admissions, Vanderbilt University. We thank you all for your presence here today.
Before we begin the day's proceedings, we'd like to notify you that should you require any assistance, you may approach us at the help desk stationed outside the auditorium. Further, please note that breakfast will be served at the cafeteria outside the auditorium and lunch will be served at the cafeteria on the ground floor. Furthermore, the Wi-Fi password and the username is placed on each table on a slip.
We would once again like to thank all of you for your presence here today. And with that, we would like to hand over the stage to Mr. Clay Hensley.
Thank you. Another round of applause to these wonderful students. Thank you, Ira. Thank you, Shivam. And thank you, Dr. Swami, for hosting us here at your school. We're quite honored. On behalf of the College Board, on behalf of IC3, on behalf of our member institutions who are represented here today, we're very grateful for you offering this beautiful space to almost 100 counselors, from more than a dozen countries from throughout the world. So I would like you as counselors to give yourself a round of applause for coming all this way to form a community, to forward your own professional development. We're very grateful that you're willing to share this time with us, so thank you. Now, before we move on to the content, and we're going to make this workshop, this day-long workshop, very interactive. We're going to try to make it engaging. Can everyone hear me okay? Am I speaking into the mic where everyone can hear me? In the back, could you raise your hand? Thank you. And I would encourage everyone throughout the day, we're not going to rely heavily on slides, but you will need to see them at some point. So feel free to move up if there are open seats. We will also be engaging table groups as well that you will work with. So what I would like to start with as a welcome from the College Board is a membership organization. These higher ed leaders are part of our governance and our membership. And we have a more than 120, almost 20-year history that explains my gray hair, I think, of delivering programming that connects you in secondary schools with our higher ed colleagues. Our flagship programs, you probably know. In India, I always have to adjust because in the US and North America, we say the SAT. And here I often hear the word SAT, and we're fine with that. So you probably know the SAT and the PSAT. We also deliver programs like AP, which is a curricular program, the Advanced Placement Program with its capstone model, and resources that we will highlight here, like Big Future. And in fact, my colleague, Dr. Zena Evans, was part of the brain trust, the leadership that helped envision that free resource for you to identify and enable students to own their future and help them identify a good match, great fit institutions. I'm going to allow, I thought the students did a great job of introducing the faculty. I'm going to allow them to tell their own story, but before I do so, many of you may know that we have an office here in India, in Delhi. It's the first College Board office outside of the US and its territories. So I want to give a chance for those who work with you in India. I want to give them a chance to introduce themselves. So I'm looking for my colleague Vikram Shah. Vikram, are you here? Yes, so Vikram is here. Vikram, would you mind coming up and saying a couple of words? And introducing my colleague also, Samdeep and Kunal are here, and they're here all week to support you. They'll be at IC3, but I just wanted, Vikram, I hope you're not putting you on the spot, but maybe say a couple of words about the office and your role and your background.
Good morning, everyone. It is nice to see such a gathering here. Very pleased to be a part of this event. My name is Vikram Shah. I joined College Board 4 weeks ago from the Graduate Management Admission Council, which are the owners of GMAT exam. Spent a decade in education before joining College Board. And clearly, College Board has a vision to make a change in the lives of candidates, schools, and universities here in India. And hence, College Board has opened up a subsidiary in India, which is a 100% subsidiary of College Board US. And I'm leading that initiative based here, along with my colleagues Kunal and Sandeep. We are very thrilled with the way the College Board is supporting us in making a difference in the lives of students and universities. So more to come. I'm very happy and excited that we will work with you guys locally here and support in all the endeavors which are promoted by College Board as well as by K-12 schools and universities. So thank you so much for giving this opportunity to us, especially to Clay and all our supporters. And coming here all the way, I think all of you have come from different parts of India as well as some from outside India as well. I would like to kind of introduce Kunal and Sandeep as well, if you guys can come here, Kunal, and Sandeep. Largely, you guys are going to drive this initiative along with me. So many of you know Kunal and Sandeep, but I would like them to kind of talk about themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikram. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to have all of you here. My name is Kunal Mehra, and I'm the Director of Outreach and Marketing for South Asia and Central Asia for the College Board. Prior to the College Board, I was head of the enterprise business at Coursera, which is a Silicon Valley startup. A lot of my role here at College Board involves working very closely with folks in schools, such as you, in India, as well as broadly in South Asia and Central Asia. So if you have any questions around any of our offerings, SAT, PSAT, AP, I'm very, very happy to answer those when, when we get time during today and tomorrow. So please feel free to walk up to me if you have any bricks or bouquets to throw at us at the College Board. Thank you very much and look forward to working with you over the next few weeks. Bye.
Good morning, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. So my name is Sandeep. I recently joined the College Board. This is like my second week here. So prior to College Board, I was working with Ashoka University. I think a lot of you might have heard of it. So I was part of their founding outreach and admissions team. And now I'm supporting College Board with the big plans that we have here in the country. So I'll be reaching out to a lot of you for your support. And we're going to be here through both of the days. I would want to interact with each one of you to understand if you have any feedback about what we are doing, if you think there are a couple of things that we can start off or you might be interested in, or if you want some info. Probably I also need to learn a lot about College Board. Still I'm in that process. But Kunal is here, Vikram is here, and I think Clay, all of us are here. It'll be fantastic if we can catch up. Thank you so much. And I hope you guys have a great workshop for both the days. Right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. Thank you. Now, it's a great pleasure to see. This is an exciting time for the world, for the College Board, for higher ed, and it's a privilege to look at, as India expands and is the largest democracy in the world, to see its progress through the lens of education. And I worked with Sandeep, again, at Ashoka. Ashoka is one of 30 universities that we currently work with within our alliance. And with Kunal, who really helped shape that to make it possible to have this entity. But the connection to what we're doing today, because we're going to concentrate today on American higher education and how you can guide students to right fit or matched options to institutions that are represented here today, but also the entire system. And the diversity of that American system is key. But there's also some key points about how the philosophy and approaches of these universities to interdisciplinary study, to the liberal arts model. Our faculty is going deeper there, but I did want to make that connection to universities like Ashoka and OP Jindal and Flame in South Asia that have adopted the liberal arts model, in part inspired by the model that we see in the US and elsewhere, but customizing and contextualizing for this unique moment in India of moving forward, where that bilateral and really a multilateral relationship is frankly in a kind of crazy time right now that we'll talk about more candidly tomorrow. But in this very dynamic time, higher ed is that sort of force to me of optimism, of hope. So I don't want to get too philosophical because this workshop will be very practical. You'll come out, our goal is that you come out of this with some very key takeaways that will both help you and your team at your school, that will help your students find those right fit options. Now, I'm going to allow my faculty to introduce themselves to establish this sort of context. But first, before I do that, I'm going to outline what we're going to do today. And because I don't have a clicker, you're going to see me go back and forth. So I apologize for that. I'll try to be as graceful as possible with that. But right now, and we're a little bit behind, and I promise that we'll catch up. But right now, we're taking about 15 minutes for introductions and context, but we'll catch up. Don't worry about the times. And our expert faculty here, I'm going to put their names up so that, and you'll have access on the IC3 website to their titles, and they're quite impressive. But let's start with these, what I call elevator speeches. I want to know, I want you to hear the journey that these leaders have taken that takes us to this point where they can then advise you. So I want to start with Dr. Zena Evans, who is a board of trustee of the College Board at the University of Florida. Zena.
Thank you and good morning. It's such an exciting time to be here and to hopefully offer you some very practical things that will help you to come to better understand the U.S. higher education. We have a really diverse group of faculty here to to engage with you. And one thing that where my institution is, the University of Florida, 52,000 students. We are a land grant institution, which means that we were recognized by the federal government as an institution that assists in developing the United States. We are a Research One institution, and that means that we are at the highest research level that can be awarded through the universities in the United States. And we're part of what's called the American Association of Universities, which is an elite set of 64 institutions in the US and Canada that you have to be invited to become a part of. Again, a very elite set of institutions. So that will be an opportunity, and it's a public institution in the state of Florida. So that's from the lens from which my comments will often be coming from today. And I have my colleagues here that will bring comments from other areas as well.
Wonderful. And Zena, I'm going to ask you to now go to this table, and we'll start there. And then John Wilkerson. So we're going along the spectrum of different types of higher ed. So land grant to another flagship.
Sure. So my name is John Wilkerson. I'm the Assistant Vice President for International Services and Executive Director of International Admissions at Indiana University. You'll hear some similar things to what Zena has just shared. Indiana is the state flagship. Indiana University is the state flagship institution in the state of Indiana. We have about 48,000 students. Every state in the United States is represented, and we have about 140 countries represented in our international student population. That population right now is the 19th largest international student population in the United States, and ranked 8th in terms of undergraduate students. So it's very large, about 8,000 international students on our campus. We're a little bit unique in that we are also a member of the Association of American Universities, high research and so forth, but a very small engineering program. You may have heard of our friends in the northern part of the state, Purdue University, another public university similar to Florida, a land grant university, whereas we're focused a bit more on the professions, so law, music, business, things like that. That's the lens from which I will be speaking. You'll hear both Zena and me say many times stuff about the public good or the public mission that our institutions have.
Great. So great to work with John. Had worked with John when he was at Missouri before this, so another great public. And Missouri's in the SEC, so we have these athletic conferences that also form research consortium. So in the US, everything is decentralized, but not unlike in India, state-driven, dynamic, innovative systems. And I have the pleasure of introducing now John Gaines from Vanderbilt University, which I'm a little bit biased here, but I consider the best university on the globe, in the world, because that happens to be my alma mater. About 25 years ago.
Clay is a proud alum of Vanderbilt. Good morning. I'm John Gaines, Director of Undergraduate Admissions. Some commonalities with my colleagues. Vanderbilt, while a private institution, not under state control, is also a member of the American Association of Universities and a Research One university, so at the highest level of scholarly achievement. As a private institution, we are smaller, with 13,000 total students, 6,800 of which are undergraduates. We have 4 colleges to which we admit undergraduates. One is engineering, one is music, one is called Peabody, which is our School of Education and Human Development, and then our largest is our College of Arts and Science, which is a traditional liberal arts model. Unlike other schools that are kind of this quintessentially medium-sized institution in the United States, we have some uniquenesses. One is that we require all of our students at the undergraduate level to live on campus for all 4 years. And we make a commitment to supporting them through not only the academic programs, but through the residential education side of the house as well, preparing them to go out into the world that is increasingly diverse and complex and demands students who understand differences across cultures and across individuals. So my perspective today will be from a slightly smaller place and yet share some commonalities with my previous panelists who introduced themselves. It's nice to be here.
Thank you, John. Please. And last, when you think about the U.S., you think, when I mentioned the liberal arts, which the liberal arts infuses itself within these large land grants, with the flagships, with large privates and AAU. But when you think about the classic model, you think of the small liberal arts college, and I couldn't think of a better representative than Adam Sapp of Pomona.
Thank you, Clay. Very excited to be here. Very happy to, of course, be in India, but also want to recognize that we have counselors from all over Asia, Southeast Asia. So excited to see folks from Nepal and the Philippines and Cambodia and Singapore and Bangladesh represented over the next 2 days, attendees as well. I am Adam Sapp. I'm the Director of Admission at Pomona. This is my 4th year at Pomona. As Clay mentioned, we are a liberal arts institution, a liberal arts college, and that is a fundamentally different sector in higher education in America, in the sense that we are only undergraduate. So we have 1,600 students at Pomona. They are all undergraduate students. We firmly believe that in order to pursue graduate school, you must have a firm grounding in the liberal arts. And so we offer 48 majors across the disciplines in order to steep our students in the understanding of cultures and ideas and the connections between cultures and ideas in various areas, such as economics or mathematics or music or the arts. And then, as is true for most Pomona students, you go on and pursue another degree. So 87% of Pomona students pursue graduate education after they get that bachelor's degree, Bachelor of Arts degree at Pomona. We're about 13% international at Pomona, so we do have relatively strong international presence. We're located about 35 miles east of Los Angeles, which gives us easy access to the Pacific Rim. And we have all 50 states as well as 60 countries represented at Pomona. Pomona is also part of the Claremont Colleges, which is a consortium of schools in Claremont, California, that allows students to have a larger experience through cross-registration. I won't go into it too much, but the system is really designed to provide students more opportunities than a single liberal arts college might provide. Really excited to be here, and I'll hand the mic back to Clay.
And Adam, before you go, where did you mention where you were?
Sure. So my experience has been mostly, well, actually exclusively in liberal arts institutions. And so after my undergraduate degree at Kenyon, I then came to Claremont McKenna, where I worked in Claremont for 7 years. I have a master's degree from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And then I worked at Princeton as their director of international admissions. And Princeton is an R1 university, but at the undergraduate level, they very much have a liberal arts model of education. And then 5 years ago, I became the director of Pomona.
Great, thank you. And John Gaines, previously, you might have mentioned this and I missed it, but previously worked at Transylvania University and Millsaps, liberal arts colleges in the southern region of our country. Zena, Dr. Evans, worked at University of Maryland, as well as UC Berkeley, Cal. So a large public coastal tradition. And I say that because even though they're representing their institutions, and you'll get from that lens, but this panel I'm just extremely proud to have assembled because they represent so many views, and just the wealth of knowledge within education represented here today is immense. We want to learn a little bit about you before we move forward. So I have a slide here that mentions College Board and our Big Future site. This is where, for free, you can access information about all 2,000 U.S. institutions. And we feel this site empowers you as a counselor. We also have options outside of the U.S., including Ashoka, including universities in Singapore and Hong Kong and the U.K. But first I want to know, okay, how many of you are counselors, are currently fill the role of counselors? Okay, how many of you fill a different position as well as counselor. So what are some examples that you fill? Principal, anybody in the admin team? How many of you teach? How many of you are also in the classroom? Okay. Well, let's look at also location. So how many of you are based in India, schools in the country of India? Okay. How many of you are within the greater Mumbai, Maharashtra area? How many of you are from north of India? How many of you are from South India? Okay. How many of you are from not Mumbai, but other parts of West India, Gujarat, other places? Okay. How many of you are from Calcutta or other parts of East Bengal? Okay. Welcome. So we have a lot of diversity even within India. How many of you are represent schools outside of India? Wow, that's diverse. I mean, you were right. I saw you on the list, but I didn't realize it was that percentage. How many of you are from SAARC countries, or from South Asian countries, but not India? How many of you are from outside of the region of South Asia? Okay, where are you from, sir? New Zealand, welcome. What about you? Dubai, so you're from the UAE. Welcome, from the Gulf countries. Any other countries from outside of the immediate SAARC region that wants to call out? Yes? Jordan, welcome, from the Levantine. Okay, great. Love Jordan. Wonderful. So how many of you, I want to balance in terms of experience. How many of you are in your first 1 or 2 years counseling? Okay. How many of you have more than 2 years but under 5 years? Okay. How many of you have more than 5 years of experience? Okay. Anybody over 10? Wow, great. Well, we'll rely on you to help us here as well. Wonderful. So am I. And I'm 20 years in. So another thing that when I was talking to our faculty, we were interested in learning more about you, is destination. Now, what we're seeing from the College Board side is that while students continue to find the U.S. a very attractive destination, knock on wood, depending on what's going on in politics, but we hope that the U.S. is considered a world-class destination, one that welcomes students and is safe. This is something that we want you to help convey to students. But how many would consider the U.S. your top choice among students? Is it your first destination? Okay. What other countries fit into that paradigm? Because what we're seeing is that more students than ever are applying to the U.S. using our programs, but also applying to other countries at the same time. This is different than when I first started at the College Board. When I first started at the College Board in 2000, our programs would be used, particularly in places like Jordan, actually in the UAE. Students would use SAT, AP to go to those destinations, or use our website and use IB or A-level. It's not just our programs that are used. We would see that, but typically a student would decide in grade 10 or 11 on a location. They might be deciding before, I may go here, but they would say, eventually I'm going to settle on the UK. And then they would maybe have an array of UK universities, or array of Canadian and US. US and Canadian would kind of blend, or Hong Kong or Singapore. We're seeing now more students looking at Florida, but also at the same time looking at University of Melbourne, looking at McGill, a university in the UK, or maybe one of the hybrid universities like NYU in Shanghai or Abu Dhabi, things like that. That makes your job much more exciting, but also much more complicated in terms of that. What other destinations are top of mind for you outside of India? What about the UK? Are your students applying there? Okay, what about other parts of Europe outside of the UK, like Germany or the Netherlands? Okay. Yeah, France, Germany. Germany has, the cost is very nice. What about Eastern Europe? Okay. Which universities? Okay. What about the Gulf, where he's from? Universities in the UAE or Qatar? No? Okay, a little bit. What about other Commonwealth countries like Australia, New Zealand? Australia, definitely, yeah. Singapore, Hong Kong. So tomorrow we'll talk more of a comparison sense. Okay, so that helps us. Are there any questions that I missed that you would want to ask our audience before we move forward? No, we're good? Okay. So our agenda is here. So again, we're a little bit behind, but I'm going to help us catch up here. We're going to start with grasping the big ideas. So we're going to look at foundational concepts, and even though that is conceptual, we're going to try to ground it in how you can apply that to your work. And there are three particular concepts that we're going to talk about in this panel, and we're going to involve you in that. After that, John, we're going to have a coffee break, and then we're going to go to about 10:30, and so right now it's 10. So that conversation is going to take about 30 minutes. We're going to have a short coffee break to give you a break, and then John Wilkerson will start with speaking the language. In our titles, we've tried to tie this to telling a story, that your job is to take a vocabulary and master that vocabulary and then translate that for your students to tell their stories to universities so that they can then contextualize that experience. And one unique thing in the U.S. or a distinctive thing, because it's not necessarily unique. A lot of universities are looking to build communities and to build classes, but we consider it in the U.S. something that is distinctive about our system, that students aren't just admitted as brains into seats or into a major, but instead looking throughout the community and how they will contribute. And I want to pause there for 1 second before, well, actually, let me go through the entire, and then I'll go into the discussion. Then we'll have lunch after John looks at speaking the language. So John will go over the key components of applications and how they fit together. So again, kind of narrowing as we start high conceptually, moving down into those key components and how they are practically applied, how you can guide students there. I often use the term that the U.S. system is not algebra. It's not arithmetic. Those components don't add up. 1 + 1 = 2. Instead, 1 + 1 = 5 or 6. So it's more calculus, and John will talk more about that. Then we'll go to lunch. Ganesh Kohli of IC3, we're very lucky to have him, and he'll address the group and tell you a little bit about the resources that IC3 provides. And we'll move then to two key areas, first led by Zena Evans. We're going to isolate two of those components, and we've been thoughtful in surveying you. We want to isolate components that you're responsible for as counselors, that you have direct control over. So first is the profile of your school. How many of you have profiles currently at your school? Okay, so I'm seeing about half. So we're going to help those that already have profiles improve and enhance that document and understand it better. And for those that don't, we're going to help you build it. Then we're not going to take a break. Zena's going to take an hour on that. And then Adam, you're going to talk about letters of recommendation, both your own letters of recommendation as well as how you guide faculty members, teachers to develop those letters of recommendation. Another coffee break, and then we're going to have John Gaines then deliver a mock admission exercise where you're going to see those components in action. So again, moving from that high level, down to very practical understandings that you can apply. And then we're going to have some open question and answer. Does that sound okay with everyone? Okay, so that's our day. And now I'm going to move a slide forward. And one thing is, we're not going to be so dependent on slides. You will have these slides afterwards, so I'm not going to rely on these, plus it's going to be hard to read. We're going to be more conversational. You have microphones. So I wanted to pause before we outline those three areas that I spoke about. I want you guys, and maybe start with John Gaines, that concept of contributing to a community and that looking at a student from their background but projecting out. John, could you talk a little bit about that and how that works at your institution? Or you can use this. Can you hear me? Yeah.
I think I'll stand because maybe you can see me a little better. So Clay alluded to the fact that in American higher education admission, 1 + 1 does not always equal 2. And I think what he is alluding to there is that we're looking at the achieved credentials of the student, grade point average, their record, their earned record on their transcript, and their standardized exam scores in many cases. But then we're also looking at all of the other documentation that the student and the student's advocates provide so that we can understand more than just whether they can do the work academically, right? But also whether they can contribute to the broader community. As I alluded in my opening remarks, many of us have residential communities or learning communities that take other forms. And in some ways, in the United States, one of the beauties of our system is that these students are teaching one another and preparing them for life beyond college. While they're not subject matter experts, right? They are life experts from their own perspective. And one of our great pleasures and great challenges, I think, is being able to see through the documentation they provide in the admission process how they might contribute to our community, not just gain from it. Obviously, they'll gain from it through the work of our faculty, right? But we want to help them understand how they might contribute to the learning environment as well. And so philosophically, I think that is a little different than many other places around the globe when it comes to ascertaining suitability for college admission. Another way to think about it is that students, many students who apply, in our case, we say something north of 95% of the students who apply are actually qualified to do the work, right? And so they could 100% hack it academically. And so instead of thinking of a student being qualified for admission, we're thinking about, through the application, how can the student become competitive to be one of the ones we invite to our community.
And that gets into fit, that idea of fit and match.
That's right.
Shaping a class, shaping a community. And John, in the international sense, because you've been working in India for a long time, plus you represent, the more comprehensive view of international. As these counselors are thinking about what's unique about U.S. higher education, that liberal arts model, what kind of student thrives at a university like yours beyond just academic excellence?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that really distinguish a student. I'll stand also. I'm wide for my height. There are a couple of things that stand out. I think just kind of following along what my colleague John was saying about fit is looking at students who approach the admissions and the college search process almost like a job search. That's more of what it's like when they're applying to US. We're evaluating their candidacy and ability to do the job, and also how they will fit within our communities. It's very similar to that approach in a job search. For international students, I think in particular, we're very interested in students who are curious. That I think is kind of obvious, but also students who are brave. Honestly, willing to take a bit of a leap. It's a lot to ask a student to cross an ocean or cross a continent or a hemisphere to come to any of our institutions. And we want them not only to be welcome and to observe and to kind of soak up the cultures on our campus, but we also expect them to contribute to that culture. None of us are at institutions that are static. We are constantly changing, and it's our students, our faculty, the dialogue that's happening within our classrooms and our learning communities that is creating that change. So I think that especially for international students, that willingness to be brave and to be bold and to try something new, to try something that they maybe didn't grow up thinking was something that they would do. I think that that's very important. The students that succeed are those.
Yeah, and even though, in India, and a lot of your students and parents are very interested in return on investment, what does this mean in terms of their career? We try to think more broadly about how they will develop as citizens, both of the world and of their local space. So that provides some foundational.
And Clay, I would say also, just carrying that job analogy further, those students who do kind of get the job and end up on our campuses are the students that end up typically having very solid career outcomes post-graduation. So we're kind of taking that bravery that they show and that ability, as John mentioned, and helping them to shape it into ways that will continue beyond our campuses.
Absolutely, that trajectory of not looking at students where they are, but where they will become. And you know, and you've heard these stats, I'm sure, many times, that students of this generation, and I always forget if they're millennials now or if we're calling them something else, but that they will have far more mini jobs than what we have and switch careers much more often. And so that ability to be nimble, to explore, to be flexible, that's part of why the US system was developed as it was. Now, so the three concepts, so we're going to take a bit of, say about 7 minutes apiece, now that I'm looking at the time, or a little bit less than that. And I'm going to start with Zena. But we have three concepts that we're going to explore here, and you'll see that extrapolated throughout the components. And John will start by putting it together in the session you're on. But I'm going to go through these three leaders to extrapolate a bit on these three concepts. But I'll outline the concepts first, just very briefly. One is that concept of right fit. And you may have heard that as being match or best fit. I actually try to avoid the term best fit because it insinuates that there's only one choice. I like right fit because I think, actually for me, I think I would have loved to have attended, Vanderbilt aside, I would have loved to have attended all of these institutions. I think you could find fit within those. So within that embracing of, one learning objective we have for today is you not only to understand and convey that concept of right fit or match, but also understand how its relationship to holism or the liberal arts model, and embrace it. And then next is, again, an action verb, because we like to think in terms of what actions you will apply. But so the first being embracing right fit. The second is guiding students to own their future and navigate the process. It can be intimidating with 2,000 institutions in the US, all of which are different, and you may hear the term often from admission officers that it depends. Is this required? Well, it depends, and you have to do research. But overall, the concept that we want you to be able to learn and embrace is that you don't have to know all the details. You guide the students to curate in their college search process a manageable list, one that's reasonable to that fit, so it moves off of fit, but manage that process and navigate it so that they own it. Now, it's challenging internationally, especially in some of the countries you're from, India and elsewhere, because parents are used to having a key role. They're paying for it, right? But ultimately, the student, this is their own future, and you as a counselor enabling them to treat this as a journey and as one step in a rite of passage to adulthood and citizenship. That's going to be part of it. And I'm going to allow John Gaines to talk a bit more about that in more detail. And then Adam, you'll talk about that third concept that, again, toward a verb, is developing a community. So that broadens it out, but you're doing that right now by engaging with IC3, developing professionally through workshops like this, building networks, and Adam is just a master in social media and within networks, so I'm going to allow you to talk about that. So let's start with Zena. And how do you define right fit in terms of your institution and your peers?
So you're going to hear us talk a lot about this concept of fit, because as we've been discussing so far, the approach in the U.S., no matter with respect to the selective institutions, is not going to be a one variable evaluation. So it's not going to be the GPA, or it's not going to be the rigor of the coursework or the grades that someone received in a particular course. It's going to be, as we talk about this holistic process. And so when we're looking at the student holistically, so it's many of those things, the test scores, the grades in their courses, the rigor, that's the destination. They've done those things. Now we're interested in the journey. And therein is where the fit concept comes in for us. Not so much, we know what grades they got, we know their preparation, but now we're looking at the how did they get there? And as we look at an application and discover that aspect of the student, this concept of right fit becomes, we can recognize it. We can see our institution, we can see, as one of my colleagues already said, 95% of the students who apply to our institutions, we have no doubt that they could do the work. But now we're looking at, in the context of the University of Florida, that has over 100 undergraduate majors, over 200 graduate majors, 16 colleges, a medical school, a dental school, a vet school, as well as a liberal arts college. In that context, what is right fit going to look like for me versus my colleague here at a private research or a liberal arts? That journey is going to mean something different for each one of us. But that's the piece when we're talking about fit. How did the student get there? And that's the story. When we start talking about the components of the application, you'll hear that more. But that's the story. That's the theme today here is about the storytelling. And that's what we need students to be able to do, to distinguish themselves, for them to be able to do, so that I can see where that, if that right fit. And again, it isn't about best fit. There's more than one right fit, depending on what the student, what direction they want to go in and how we might view them. So think of the concept of fit as the journey. All those other variables are destinations. They've arrived. We know those things about them, but what was the journey for those? And that in itself will reveal to us about right fit relative to who we are as individual institutions. Anything?
I think that's great. And in terms of, this is an anxiety, if you're dealing with teenagers, everything's anxiety ridden, I find. But one thing I like about the U.S. process as well compared to others is that the students are choosing. They're selecting as well. So even as John and you at Vanderbilt, which is highly selective, your admittance rate now is 9%? Wow. So very highly selective. But there's plenty of students that will get into Vanderbilt, also get into Florida, get into Pomona, and then they get a chance to actually select or turn you down. And so it comes full circle if this is done right. But could you talk a little bit about the navigating the process?
Yes, I think in contrast to systems in other countries and other cultures, I think the American college search process, or I should say the search for fit at a U.S. university, demands that the student take a broader ownership in that process than perhaps at another institute, in another country or culture. For instance, as I mentioned before, we're looking well beyond the marks earned and the grades achieved and the test results to determine whether or not that student should be part of our community. In many countries and many cultures, it's those marks on the final exams that will slot you into a certain type of institution. And that's just not the case in the United States. And so when I'm talking with parents and families about the process of applying to college or university, I like to frame it as the young adult's first steps into young adulthood, right? This is, by its very nature, the point in time when the child is separating from the family, often physically, but metaphorically as well, right? And so a well-executed U.S. college search should aid that student in that journey for the student who is interested in it. And so it does, building on what Zena said, require research. It requires the student to do kind of a survey of everything that's available out there, but it also requires the student to do a sort of internal survey. And that internal survey can be about likes and preferences. It can be about career outcomes. It can be about intended majors or courses of study. But I think the most important piece of it is the student taking some time to think how they would like their life, not their education, but their life, to be different or like the lives of the family they're coming from, right? So take it very simply. If they're from a rural part, from the countryside, do they want a life that lands them back in the countryside? Or are they ready for a life in a city? Do they want the kind of profession that their parents have had? Or do they want to strike out in a whole new way? So this kind of internal inventory of likes and preferences is a step on the journey towards young adulthood, is a step on the journey towards independence. And so while the college search process's ultimate outcome is an offer of admission, that offer of admission and which offer of admission they choose is what's really going to set them on their path. And so, so I think in ways that are really distinct from other from the university search process in other countries, it requires the student to own that process, to take hold of it, to assert him or herself with the parents, sometimes for the first time in their lives, to chart their own destiny, if you will. And that all sounds very philosophical and highfalutin when I say that, but I think it's a very natural part of that journey to young adulthood.
But it also explains some of the things that they'll be learning today, which and over the next, if you attend tomorrow, that a question about, well, why, in the case of Florida, you have the coalition application as part of your process, which is distinct from what Pomona may ask for. And some outside the U.S. may say, well, why can't you just make it simple and make the Department of Ed, just have one thing and everybody does the same thing. And part of that is that when they're applying to Indiana or Vanderbilt, you want to see, John, I believe, that they've shown some interest, they've done some research into what it's like to be there, within reason, because they'll be coming, a continent away. But, and as we transition to Adam, the relationships and the networks that are made here today, how does that contribute overall to the profession and to the field?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to the shaping of our communities, we have a new president at Pomona. She's the former dean of faculty at NYU, New York University. And she, in her inauguration speech, said, and I want to get it right, so I checked it this morning, diversity creates difference, difference promotes learning, learning ensures understanding. And I think that's really true. And when we think about that in forming community at a place like Pomona, it means that we're going to admit many different kinds of students from many different kinds of places. And one of the great things that I often have the opportunity to do is to create roommate connections. Every once in a while, I will just send the dean of our housing a little email from kids that I've read, and I say, I think so-and-so should live with so-and-so, because I just think they would get along. And let me just tell you one quick story that I think articulates this notion of community really well. So in addition to reading India, I also read the state of Hawaii. And 3 years ago, I admitted a student whose name is Kahale. He's from Molokai, which is a very small island as part of the Hawaiian Islands. I also admitted a student named Vikram from Vasant Valley here in India, up in Delhi. And I thought, gosh, they're really interesting. One wants to major in psychology, one wants to major in sociology. They were both really interested in music and the arts. So I said, hey, our dean of housing office's name is Frank. So I said, Frank, can you put Vikram with Kahale, because I actually think they would make a good pair as roommates. And they did. They really hit it off. So you have a boy from Delhi and a boy from a small island in Hawaii coming together as roommates. I would see them often eating in the dining hall together. Kahale's aunt is a good friend of mine, so I would check in with him very frequently, and come to find out that summer, Kahale went to India. And then the following spring break, Kahale invited Vikram to go to Molokai. They're now juniors. They're about to live together on North Campus. And yes, Kahale taught Vikram a little Hawaiian, and Vikram taught Kahale a little Hindi. They know each other through understanding, and that notion of being in a residential community, that notion of understanding really through relationship building. There's a lot of research that says that peer effects matter, that who you surround yourself with matters. There's also a lot of research that says that mentorship matters, that if you have adults in your life who care about you, that it will make a big difference in whether you have an outcome that is a positive outcome or not. And one of the things that all four of us pride ourselves on, and many within the American system I think do very well, is this notion of community building. And the reason isn't because we think it's a good idea. The reason is because the education research supports the fact that this is how you do it well. And I think when you think about what that looks like, whether it's fit, whether it's the journey, whether it's thinking about a student's role on a campus, All of those things really come down to the fact that at the end of the day on our campuses, you are a scholar and you are a citizen. You have a role in a classroom and you have a role outside of a classroom. And it's the relationship between these two that students must really reflect on when they are thinking about their choices, because we are insistent that they do this through the process. But I think you as educators working with them also have to be insistent that they do this as they move through their journey with you.
So the opportunity is allotted. Even though the classroom itself at these institutions, they are interactive. They're participant-based, project-based learning environments where, even the idea of credit hour, is based on that students are present and that they're measured like that. And so that reflects that. But that learning does not end within the classroom. It instead extends, just like life and just like what you're here today. So in that same way that the networks that students are making that will extend. So, my classmates from where I went to school at different institutions, including Vanderbilt, continue to be partners of mine, both personally and professionally in moving forward, and I access that. But the same with you, the folks that you're meeting here today, as well as those on the stage, you will continue to keep in touch with and ask questions. It will enable you to extend your knowledge well beyond what you can just get from the internet, what you can just get from your own experience. And so that idea of community. Now I'm careful, and when I usually talk about this, up until this year we had several admission scandals in the US that made global news. I'm curious if you guys are familiar with one particular scandal that was, it was an FBI investigation called Varsity Blues. Did any of you read anything about that? Okay, so not as much. So it's not as relevant, and it's not as relevant to foundational. But the reason why I brought it up is usually when everyone gets when I'm talking about your own community, that as counselors, one reason IC3 and College Board are partnering is we believe in the counseling community as having transformational impact and being able to shape student experience and accessing universities like this. But I'm careful now to say that sometimes that can be confused. I was just in Shanghai doing a similar workshop at NYU there. And sometimes there's a concept in China called guanqi, or that's considered more transactional. And that's not what we mean. It doesn't mean that just because you know Adam, you're going to have a leg up in the admission process for your student. But instead, because you know Adam, you have access to an array of knowledge and information and now networks that allow you to evolve and progress professionally. And there's other networks that we'll talk about later in the day, and especially John's session later, of not just IC3, not just the College Board, but NACAC, CIS, and TICE. If you're familiar with TICE, we encourage you to think about this as a launching point, especially for those of you who are in that 1 to 2 year of your start, to think about these networks as ways that you can develop yourself in your career as you move forward in helping students. So those are the 3 areas. It's about time for our first short break to just give you a chance to wake up, get to know one another. But I want to pause and ask if you have some clarifying questions regarding those foundational concepts and what we'll be doing. Yes. And I think if you can project out. There we go. I'll let you hold that. There you go.
Good morning, Mr. Clay Hensley, and good morning, the panelists. I feel proud to be here. Let me introduce myself. I am Prakash. I am from the state of Tamil Nadu. For the last 15 years, I have been working as the principal of the school and as the founder principal of the school. So a very simple question to Ms. Saina Evans. The question, because recently, just in the morning, I read there are 248, as on this date, 248 mass shootings happened in US. And the media has exposed this in almost all the newspapers and all. And gun violence is being found to be very high and in large numbers. This is the news which has already been spread among the parents. As being a counselor, come a principal, there are some occasions that I face this situation. The parents are asking these questions. How far my child, if I am sending to US, how far he will be safe? So this is the simple and a very humble question for my part.
That's top of mind safety.
Yes, absolutely. And it's top of mind for all of our institutions. So, well, let me say a couple of things about that. Just like any place else, what you hear on the news and how we live it are very, very different. Now, there have been some horrible incidents that have happened here recently, whether it's in Dayton, Ohio, or El Paso, Texas, and things of that nature. And so we in our individual institutions have elaborate security plans. We have a 54-member police force on our campus. And not only for the safety of our students and our faculty, but the fact that we're part of a community. So we have our police force, our security forces on each of our campuses. We work with the police force for each of the cities that we are in, and we work with the county or the sheriff or the larger regional police force within all of our campuses. One of the things about higher education in the United States is very few of our campuses have walls around them. They're seen as places of learning where anybody could walk in and come into our communities to learn, to go to our libraries. But at the same time, we give all of our students, our faculty and staff, identifications. And there are some places where you're going to need to swipe in order to be able to get into different areas. And we also have different things, particularly now in such a technology age. There are a variety of different security apps that our students use where they can, if it's late and they're leaving the library, they can use the app and get an escort to come and get them and to take them home. At this particular time, for each state represented here, guns are not allowed on our campuses. In Indiana, Florida, Tennessee, and California, guns are not allowed on our campus. In the state of Florida, you cannot, if a gun is in your car, it has to be locked in a certain way and things of this nature, but they're not allowed on our campuses. They're not allowed in our classrooms. So, and then we all have, like I said, very elaborate security plans to be able to address how secure you are. And then last, and probably the most important piece, is that we do a lot to help our students to be sure that they don't find themselves in compromising situations where they might be run into danger in some cases. There are always random acts that no one can plan for, but we spend a lot of time with our students helping them to understand those where they can be in control. We have blue light systems on our campus where where there's a blue light, there's an emergency phone there that you can call someone, or that we are doing self-defense classes. So just like living in any city, the opportunity for you to run into someone who wants to do harm does exist, but we take very intentional efforts to arm our students and our faculty with the knowledge and the resources that they need in order to be prepared for what you can be prepared for.
Yeah, I would echo that. I'll just add, Pomona is located near Los Angeles, which is the second largest city in the United States. The county, Los Angeles County, has 10 million people in it. It is not small, but Claremont itself is suburban. We're relatively far away, quite frankly, from the city of Los Angeles. It's about 30 miles. We're not sort of in the middle of LA, but even still, and this gets to something Zena was saying, the federal government has a vested interest in this, and they actually do require us to report. It's called the Clery Act, and we do need to report data on crimes that occur on our campuses. And so if you have parents who are particularly concerned about this, you can request the Clery Act data from the institution, and they do have to give it to you, or you can find it online. It's usually very easy. And I will tell you, last year at Pomona, in LA County, on our Clery Act data, if you look at the most reported crime at Pomona College last year, it was bike theft. From unlocked bikes. So students buying a bike, getting around, but not buying a lock, and then the bike got taken. So really thinking about that in perspective with all of the other things. This isn't to diminish the gun violence issues, but this is to say they are not as representative as you might think when it comes to our students' lives.
And your parents, when we poll parents, safety, student well-being is important to all parents. But particularly in this region, South Asia, we find that that is something that is of great concern. And there have been things that have occurred, not just those shootings, but other shootings that have affected those from South Asia that makes it top of mind. So we want you to be able to talk about these issues with authority, with integrity, and also how you admit students. You look at, I mean, you know, there's processes in place where you're looking at student well-being, I mean, in the process. John?
I would also add that, candidly, this is an area where the United States has a great opportunity to learn from you and from your students and from these perspectives. It is of tremendous benefit in a conversation about gun violence in the United States to have kids from Indiana or Florida or Tennessee or California hearing from students or parents from the UK or India or Doha who just, this is baffling to them. I will say it is equally baffling to me and probably most of us. But I think that's part of that dialogue that we're looking for. It is an important topic. It's one that we don't shy away from. It's one that we constantly have conversations about with parents and students. The last point that I'll make is if you think about the communities where our institutions and most of the other 2,000 institutions that Clay mentioned are located, these tend to be very educated communities, more diverse communities, communities of thought and consideration. And so it's a little bit different than what, as to Zina's point, what you might see in other areas of the United States that don't have these hyper-educated, very diverse, engaged communities surrounding them.
Tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about, tomorrow's more advanced topics, but the red state issue. Have any of you heard of the term a red state or a blue state? These are political terms. Three of the four of these institutions are located in what we call red states, in that they voted Republican in the last election. However, these universities are within very blue or progressive areas within those states. I think I saw a hand over here. Yes.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Avni Parekh from WebGeo Group of Schools. I just have a query. Although we love US in terms of higher education, and that's first sought after country for our students as well. However, the kind of policy changes that's happening by Mr. Trump, certainly there is a lot of anxiety among the parents and the students. I have a nephew of mine, and he's probably struggling to find internship from last 2 months. So certainly, how would you suggest that, how do we probably address this kind of a concern among our students and parents' body? Thank you.
Is your nephew, has he completed his course of study now? And is his internship required for credit? Is it part of his? Yeah. So this is probably falling under something called curricular practical training. Most of our, well, I know all four of our institutions, most institutions like ours, will have career services, not only at the university level, but oftentimes embedded within their programs. Leveraging to one of your points about that, I think, John, you were mentioning network, the importance of network. So leveraging networks of really affiliations across the globe for each of us to find those opportunities for internship. We do hear oftentimes from parents concerns, particularly around the STEM OPT regulatory changes that are happening in the United States. I will say those are legitimate concerns, but this is an area, again, where I think the media is, I don't want to say that they're overinflating this, because it is a serious issue, one that we all take very seriously and who have very expressive campus leaders talking about this. But it's an area where education and industry are actually lockstep. And so there's a tremendous amount of advocacy towards allowing greater freedoms and opportunities for education and kind of retaining opportunities for employment, internship, so forth for these students who are doing tremendous amounts of study and research to contribute. You know, that's of benefit to them. It's ultimately a benefit to the United States. So I think that's a kind of tempered, nuanced response to keep in mind that, yes, Donald Trump says a lot of things. I'm going to let that settle for a minute. But what he is ultimately empowered to do long term, there is much discourse and a lot of voices of reason and rationale kind of surrounding and tempering that.
And I'd like for Zena also to address it, but and John, you talked very practically about that particular, and visa. I'm sure all of you have many questions about visas and is that being impacted. But from a broader sense of welcomeness and how U.S. higher ed embraces internationalization, but particularly students from India. Zena, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, it's been a significant engagement for higher education to ensure that our international students know that they're welcome and know that we want to have them on our campuses and that we are there. For example, when suddenly there was this Muslim freeze or whatever was going on, Muslims into the U.S., every one of our campuses, we immediately, because this was at a time when our students were in transitions, we were immediately on the phone trying to find our faculty and our students to see, were they back in the country? If they weren't, where were they? And what could we do to help them to be able to get back to our community where we felt it was a safe environment? As you hear about these different things, higher education has really stepped up to the plate and said, this is why it is important to have a diverse group of individuals on our campuses. This is why it's particularly important for us to have, if we're going to be global universities, we have to have a global engagement on our campuses. And so it's been very, very telling as you look at higher education as we've gone through the last 2.5 years. You haven't seen any fewer colleges or universities out there engaging and wanting international students. Higher education has not taken a step back from engaging with increasing the number and the opportunity because we see the value in it for our students, seeing the value in it in the larger context. We're in some different times right now, and I think higher education in the United States is stepping up to that and saying, what do we need to do to ensure that door is open for our institutions?
Adam, were you going to say something? Okay. Yes.
One thing that is helpful, I think, for you to keep in mind is many times what rhetoric is coming out of Washington, D.C. is not aligned with the popular opinion in the United States. So I would strongly encourage you, especially as you're working with parents or students, if there's a topic of great concern, you would be hard-pressed to not find a public poll run by Pew or Gallup or someone that's kind of gauging how does the U.S. generally feel about this. And so, for instance, immigration, feelings of welcomeness, the importance of diversity, these are generally very popular opinions in the US. So it's an area of dissonance where right now our politics and the messages that are coming out of Washington do not align with how the majority of Americans feel and think.
And as we move toward the break, and I'm going to take the opportunity as moderator to shorten the break because we're going to have an early lunch. It's going to be 11:45. I know for India in particular, that's a very early lunch, but that's just how the schedule aligned. And John is going to we're going to cut yours by a little bit in the components, but not by much. But what I'm proposing is that you take a 5-minute break just to stretch your legs, get coffee real quick, and then come back, and then we'll start with the components. I did want to address one thing, and again, tomorrow, if you're coming back, we'll talk about some of these higher concept issues there. This is meant to be more practical. But we talked a lot about diversity. There's, in the U.S., 1,800 or so undergraduate 4-year institutions, and when you count our 2-year institutions, you're getting into 3,000 or 4,000. There are lots of diversity among those types of institutions. When I was at Vanderbilt, it was actually considered politically conservative. I don't think it's considered that anymore. Georgetown is known, even though Bill Clinton graduated, is known for being conservative. So you have different institutions with different viewpoints, and then within those institutions, you have students and faculty and leadership of different persuasion politically. But there is consensus, I believe, and from the College Board standpoint, around key issues of inclusion, of international welcomeness, of student well-being, of access and equity and autonomy of these institutions. There are key concepts where there is consensus across this diverse range of institutions. So welcomeness of international students, and particularly from students in this region, I've never found somebody say, no, we don't want that. So with that, I'm going to cut off questions for now, but we're going to have plenty of time to interact. Let's take 5 minutes and get coffee. We'll come back and John will be set up for the component space, okay? Thanks.
West University. These will vary, but we're going to discuss that. We've already spent quite a bit of time talking about right fit. You'll see on these slides that it's referred to as good fit. To Clay's point earlier, these are interchangeable. The idea being that for most applicants, most students, there isn't just one best fit institution. There will be several that are either right or good. Briefly, we'll go over the 3 most common models of admission that are practiced at U.S. universities. We'll spend the bulk of our time talking about holistic admissions through the next 2 days, but we'll want to make sure that you're aware of the other admissions models that are out there. And then I'm going to be looking at our my expert colleagues, your expert colleagues, to just get some differences between public perspective, private perspective in terms of institutional imperatives, missions, things like that. All right. Is everyone ready? Here we go. All right. So first off, let's take a look at the application components. Now keep in mind that what's required to complete an application, as Clay mentioned earlier, you know, if a student were to ask what we need, oftentimes it depends. And oftentimes what is required to complete an application at a single university may vary depending on program of study. So these are just kind of the general things that most every university is going to be asking for. First and foremost is the application. As Clay mentioned, there are multiple applications. Please raise your hand if you are familiar with the common application. Okay. The coalition. Okay. All right. Those are the 2, dare I say, actual common applications, meaning that they're just shared application platforms. Something that many students are oftentimes not aware of is the fact that the common application in the United States, I think, is only about 750-ish members right now. All of us are on Common App, yeah. But that still leaves about 1,250 universities that are not on the common application. So keep that in mind. At Indiana University, for example, a student can apply through the common application, the coalition, or through our own Indiana University application. Now, guess which our preference is? Any idea? We have none. See, that's good. Our preferred application is the one that the student clicks submit on. So, any different for, yeah. So I think for you as counselors, though, the approach to the application is a little bit different in how you're interacting with students. So What a student is able to do or is asked to do on the coalition application platform is going to be a little bit different from the common application platform or from an institutional platform. So part of your work with students, I think, as a counselor is kind of identifying which of those application platforms works nicely for them. Again, we have no preference, just pick one and stick with it. Official transcripts. These are going to be required of students, but at various times throughout the application and enrollment process. So I'll ask my colleagues, are any of you self-report? Zena is, okay. So there's another jargon term, self-report. There are many universities, Florida, the UC system, I think both Iowa and Iowa State, lots of very well-known universities that use self-reported grades in making the initial admission assessment. That does not mean that the student doesn't ultimately have to provide an official transcript. It just means that we're trusting you in the process. We're going to take your word that you're reporting what it is that you're seeing, and at some point down the line, you'll need to give us an official transcript. Great. Standardized test, I will mention transcripts also. You'll find variants from one university to the next as to what years they need to see. Some universities will need to see grade 9 all the way through most current semester. Other universities may not. They may only need, depending on if they're doing CBSEs or so forth, they may only need 2 years or variations. Depending on which, we're really going to get in the weeds. Depending on if an applicant is applying early action, early decision 1, 2, so forth, and we'll talk more about those as well. They may be requested to submit fall term grades in the spring as well. So transcripts come in a lot of different ways at a lot of different times. Standardized test scores. So raise your hand if you're familiar with any of these 3 terms. Test required, test optional, test flexible. I see a lot of them. Maybe I know a couple of them. Yeah. I think, let's see. Well, let's just do a quick poll. Indiana University is test required, and I'll tell you what each of these mean, but we're test required. Pomona? Test required?
Test required.
Test required. All right. So you'll see kind of a trend with maybe more selective institutions do like to see a standardized test, an SAT, an ACT. In the U.S., typically those are the 2 that we're looking at. Some universities in the U.S. will ask for SAT-2s, subject tests, so forth. So test required is pretty easy to hash out. That means we need to see one of those exams. Test flexible, any guesses as to what that is? All right. I'll use University of San Francisco as an example. Great Jesuit institution in San Francisco. They're test flexible for international students, meaning that they do need to see a standardized test score, but it might be a WASC from a student in Africa, or it might be an HKL decade ago from Hong Kong, or it might be a Gaokao or a Huikao, something like that. So they may take a national standardized test. That's test flexible. Test optional, any guess as to what that is? Also pretty self-explanatory. Means that students are not required to submit a standardized test score. In most instances, if a university is test optional, a student will have 2 pathways to admission. So one pathway will be not submitting a test score, the other pathway will be submitting a test score, and usually the student has to make that decision at the point of application. So they can't say, I want to be test optional, and then get really great SAT scores a month later and say, no, I want to go the test required route. So that's something for counselors to keep in mind, and it varies by university, those testing policies, especially where international students are concerned. So my previous institution, University of Missouri, was test optional for international applicants, but not for domestic applicants. The institution where I started, Columbia College, was test required for all, and IU is test required. So you'll see kind of variance within those areas as well. I will say on behalf of my colleagues at test optional institutions, those pathways to admission do not disadvantage a student who doesn't submit an SAT score. So it's just a different pathway. I think, Clay, you would know this better than I, but I think even universities that are test optional, they're typically receiving still 80% of applications. Yeah, so most students are still providing those scores. Essays and or personal statements. If you can see, I have the S at the end of essays in parentheses. Some institutions will ask for a couple of various forms of writing samples. So it may be essays that they have to submit with the application. One might be a standard essay prompt, a question that's asked by the Common Application, for example. The other might be free-flowing, kind of just a general question, or some universities will also ask to submit prior graded essays that they've submitted for class grades. Do any of you require that? No. All right. So it's a little less common. Students get a little anxious, as you probably know. Yes, nodding heads, yeah, about writing essays. There are some really great resources about essay writing. We're happy to share those with you, so let me know if you have questions about that. Letters of recommendation. John is going to spend quite a bit of time talking about that with you guys. And then English language proficiency, TOEFL, IELTS, Duolingo, PTE, Cambridge, MELAB. Who am I missing? I think that's about it. And oftentimes, students may be exempted from those. So if you are, for example, Indiana University, if you are a student who is enrolled in a high school in India, we do not require a TOEFL. University of Missouri did. So again, it depends whether or not you'll need to submit English proficiency scores. Next. All right. So really quickly, we spent a lot of time talking about this already this morning, so this will be fast. Looking at good fit, I just want us to give a little bit of thought about that, because this idea of good fit, right fit is going to frame much of our conversation going forward. All right, so this is what we often are thinking about as admissions officers when we're talking about right fit or good fit. We're really looking at the first question that an admissions officer answers is, has this student demonstrated the evidence, have they shown us evidence of the likelihood of success, right? The worst kind of outcome for us would be to have a student come to our campus who is not prepared. And we're actually measured, we're held to account by students' ability to proceed throughout their undergraduate education. So from year 1 to year 2, universities will produce something called a retention rate from year 1 to year 2. I'm sure we're all over 90%. Yeah. That's readily available information. Oftentimes state funding is tied to that rate if you're at a public university. It's very important in terms of rankings and so forth. So that's the first question we're asking. Is the student likely to be successful? Next, we're looking at academic history. So as you're going to see in the models of admission, yes, we look holistically at students, but part of answering that first question, that likelihood of success, is really looking at the academic ability that that student has demonstrated thus far. Next, we're looking at the campus community, our campus community. So John had mentioned earlier, what's it going to be like for that student when they come through our gates at our campus and start to integrate into our learning environments? Zena, you were speaking at break a little bit about academic performance and context. Would you like to talk a little bit about why is it important for students, or for us, I think, as we're answering that question about likelihood for success. Why is it important for us to contextualize academic history, and how do we go about doing that?
Yes, it's a very important component because, that number that is produced, the GPA, it can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. A 4.0 could be a student who didn't challenge themselves, took all the basic courses, and so the level of preparation that we want to see may not necessarily be there, but they're a 4.0 student. So, but you may have another student that's also a 4.0 student, but they've taken the most rigorous curriculum, or they've taken, if there's an IB program or an AP program or an honors program. So if we're looking at those two students, that 4.0 means nothing to us. It is the process, what kind of courses did they take, how well did they do on those courses that got them there. So oftentimes we get hung up on that number aspect of it. What is the minimum GPA? And that's far less important to us than it is how did you get there. And oftentimes people mistake this idea of a cutoff from what we say, well, here's what last year's class looked like. And typically students that look like this are maybe most competitive, but we're going to be looking at it beyond just those two variables. So it's early on, very early on in our presentation, we talked about, in the US context of holistic admissions, 1 + 1 rarely equals 2. There's a lot of other things that are going into it, and that's a good example of where something like that comes into play.
Are any of you familiar with the French grading system, the French baccalaureate? This is in a nutshell, it's basically that in a French classroom, grades are distributed on a perfect bell curve, and the grades are 0 to 20. One student in that class gets a 19 or a 20, no matter how smart that class is. So imagine we as admissions professionals are looking not only at a school that's grading with that system, but also looking at a cohort of students in that particular year that may be more or less strong than students from a previous year. So that's the level of detail that we're getting into when we look at that academic rigor and start to contextualize students' performance. If we tie that back then to that persistence rate, remember students who proceed from year 1 to year 2, to Zena's point, all of us with retention rates of 90% or higher, it's very important that we are bringing students consistently who look academically like the students who are getting us those retention rates of 90% plus. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of context going into, as Clay mentioned, shaping our class. If you could talk a little bit, Adam, I'm curious about, as students integrate into the campus community, how is creating that class, how is it important as you're starting to form an incoming class, the academic piece in particular?
Nope. There we go. Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, what you really do want to have are students who are going to come in and be able to succeed, but maybe not quite soar immediately, right? We want them to be able to succeed and be strong, but we also want them to be able to be pushed. And I'll stand because the metaphor that I usually use is this idea of the floor and the ceiling. So we will often describe a curriculum in a high school level as having a ceiling. There are only so many courses you can take, so many levels you can do. You know, you can't do 20 courses at A2, right? You're generally going to do 3, sometimes 4 maximum if you're in an A-level curriculum. Or if you're in an AP curriculum, there might be limits to the number of APs that are available. Or if you're in an IB curriculum, usually you'll have your HLs and your SLs, and it'll be 3 and 3, sometimes 4 and 2, but usually 3 and 3. That is the ceiling of the curriculum. The reason that we like to talk about it that way is because at our institutions, your ceiling is our floor. So you have reached the top of the curriculum at your high school. That's fantastic. We're interested in you as a student pushing yourself. But when you get to our institutions, there generally are not ceilings on our curriculum. You can't take all the math that's available at Florida as an undergraduate. I promise. There's too much to do. You can't take all the philosophy available at Pomona. There is no ceiling there in the philosophy department. You will continue to rise, and that's why you might go on and get a PhD in philosophy. And so the idea is what you're telling us is A, that you know what pushing yourself in an academic environment looks like, and B, you've developed the habits of mind to understand how to be good, and then the work to do the good, the excellent work at the end, right? You've produced the grades, the results, whether that's through exam scores or through internal grading, to confirm that you have learned the content. And so this idea of mastery of content and also mastery of process and mastery of curriculum, those two things combine to signal to us that you'll be a good student on our campus.
Which ties in nicely then to academic interests and sociocultural development. So as we mentioned earlier this morning, we're really looking at producing students beyond, or students who have grown beyond just what they're learning in the classroom. So John, Vanderbilt has, of course, a big research institution, R1, but heavily rooted in liberal arts curriculum. To help contextualize this, could you tell us a little bit of how an admissions committee might look at, or what are they looking for from an engineering applicant versus a student who's going to do a conservatory music program?
Right. This is an excellent point. So I mentioned before that most of our applicants have the credentials to do the work, but we're evaluating them according to which of our schools they are interested in, right? So to your question, the best engineering candidates for my campus will have the highest level of physics and at least calculus on their transcript. They won't be admitted to engineering if they don't have those two things. Our music school is one of the top music schools in the United States, but I don't need my trombonist or my flutist to necessarily have calculus, right? They'll need to have a different kind of aptitude. I'll still need 4 years of math. I'll still want 4 years of science, but they don't necessarily have to be at the highest level. And if you think about this from a career perspective, what makes for a really great future teacher should look a little bit different than what makes for a really great future conservatory musician. Or an engineer ought to look different than a student who wants to practice law. And their abilities and the courses that they have undertaken to demonstrate their readiness for such a career path should look a little different from each place to the next. And so we're paying keen attention to that. And at the end of the day, when I'm moderating, you'll all get a chance to practice that with me. So that'll be fun.
Thank you. So you see that contextualization that we're doing in the admissions committee is not only contextualizing your students within their current learning environments, but also trying to understand how are they going to fit and be contextualized within our learning environments and beyond. Are we, the question that we're often asking is, are we the institution that is best suited to help this student meet X goal that they have identified? Economic realities. Some institutions do offer need-based aid, so a few more terms that we're going to throw out. Admissions models are sometimes need-blind, need-aware, need-sensitive. These terms that, raise your hand if you've heard at least one of those terms. Okay, good, but clearly we need to spend just a minute talking about what that is. Zena, I feel confident that both you and I are need-blind institutions. Need-blind means that a student's ability to pay for or afford their university study has absolutely no bearing on whether or not Florida or Indiana will offer them admission. That does not mean that it won't have bearing on whether or not that student actually has the means to attend. So while we may offer admission, if a student cannot afford what it's going to take to come to our universities, there's very little in most public universities that we can do to meet that need gap. Now, I believe both Vanderbilt and Pomona are need aware, correct? I'll let you, one of you, explain that.
Well, I'll start because we may have a different thought. So
It
at
depends
Vanderbilt-
again, yes.
Yeah, here we go. It depends, right? So at Vanderbilt, we are need blind, as Indiana and Florida are, for all U.S. citizens and eligible permanent residents, meaning that we don't care whether the family's seeking aid or not to come. For our international applicants, whether they are coming to us from abroad or from within the United States, we are need aware, meaning the family's ability to pay sets them on a different evaluative path. If the family says that they do not need aid to come to Vanderbilt, they are evaluated in the same way all of our domestic students are, and we make that assessment just based on their academic credentials and their application components. If they tell us on the application that they are seeking aid to come, meaning they wish to have a scholarship or need-based aid or want funding to come, then they're set off on a different path. And we do consider their ability to pay or their inability to pay when we are making those admission decisions. That said, every year we do admit international students, many of them who are seeking aid. And if we admit the student, we will meet their need 100% in every case. So while we are need aware, the reality for those neediest students that we admit is that we will fund them to the extent of their eligibility.
And John has introduced another need-related term, which is meet full need. So institutions who meet full need may be a little bit more difficult to gain admission to because they tend to be hyper-selective, but the opportunity for students who do have significant funding challenges at those institutions, it's oftentimes going to be more than maybe what Zena or I could offer as a public university.
Yeah, and I would slice this a little more thinly and say that need-sensitive, need-aware, and need-blind are admissions policies. And so the question that you should ask, or you should arm your students to ask, is what's the admissions policy around admitting international students who might need financial aid? And then you'll hear one of those three phrases. And I would differentiate that from the financial aid policies. And the financial aid policies are essentially based on the question, how do you package your students when it comes to the financial aid package? So like John, at Vanderbilt, at Pomona, we are need aware for non-US citizens attending schools outside of the United States. For all other students, we are need blind, meaning we do not look at family finances. When we package, so that's our admissions policy. When we package, we also meet 100% of demonstrated need, like Vanderbilt, but we do it because we do not have merit scholarships. We do it with need-based aid, and we are also no loan. So we do not package loans in financial aid packages. And so we have only institutional grant, and we have student work. And that is what comprises 100% of the financial aid package when the student does that. At Pomona, 44% of international students are on financial aid. For the liberal arts college world, that's actually pretty high. The other question you might arm your students to ask is, what percent of your international students are on aid? Because that will actually give you a sense of, how much money is kind of available, what the size of the pot is, so to speak. And that may also give you a sense of maybe the socioeconomic diversity of that international student population. So those kinds of questions help you really get at international community when it comes to socioeconomic diversity.
Zena, you beat me to it. I was about to, yeah.
Just to complicate this just a little bit more, Adam made an excellent point about all of those phrases being specific to admissions. And then at a public institution, because we are funded by our individual states. That's where our money, that's where, I was going to say it's substantial, but not so substantial anymore. That's where a portion of our funding comes from, is from our individual states. And so therefore, we're limited in giving out any financial state monies that we might have to international students. If we have institutional money, or if we have a donor who's given money and they want to put it towards an international student and things of this nature. So there are typically these small pots of money that are there. But then also for us in Florida, on that side, when you submit, the student has to submit their I-20 and get all that information, they have to show a bank account that can cover the first year at the University of Florida. Because we know, much like my colleagues, we don't want anyone to come there who's going to get there and not going to be able to afford it, not going to be able to continue. And so we ask that they be able to document that. They have the resources available. It could be, it doesn't have to necessarily be dollar for dollar in the bank, but there is a way to get that for that first year, knowing that other opportunities may present themselves later on. So again, a lot of the things need aware, need sensitive, need blind are very specific to how we will consider you in our applicant pool. But then once it leaves there, that's really where the publics and privates kind of diverge on how we can spend our resources and on whom we can spend those financial aid resources.
Yeah, and I would, to Zina's point, I would add just another vocabulary term, certification of finances. And so there will be a form, and this is kind of gets into the lingo, the language. Your families may be asked to provide what's called a certification of finances, and that is essentially a confirmation of their bank statement. Once they have that official certification of finances, they can use it, sometimes in the application process that'll be required, to submit to various colleges. So if they get a follow-up to say, we'd like to see your certification of finances, that's what Zina was referring to, and once you do it once, you then can submit it to all of those institutions. They will accept that form.
So what I hope to exemplify with this was the complexity of the U.S. college search process. One of the key takeaways that I hope you gain from this conversation is that a student should never take a university off their list, their first list, if it's a place that they're interested in attending. Once they've put that list together, it's all of these factors that they should be researching with you, with their parents, to understand, is the institution a good fit for that student? And is that student a good fit for our institution? So that fit conversation is happening in both places. So it's complex, and there are a lot of just realities involved in it. Thank you. All right, so non-cognitive indicators. We've talked about the stuff that is a little bit easier to measure. What else are we looking at? How many of you are familiar with the term grit? It's been a very popular term in admissions. The perhaps more academic phrasing of grit is a non-cognitive indicator of success. So we're looking at character, the sociological context of a student. College Board is actually doing some very interesting work in that space, trying to understand the metrics around some of those non-cognitive indicators and contextualizing an applicant. We look at their engagement. What are they doing in their community? What are they doing in their school? So how are they contributing? We also then look at grit, again, as I mentioned. Grit, in a very short definition, is essentially the ability to persevere, to be successful regardless of whatever is happening in your social context, whether those social contexts are within the school, within the family, within the community, what have you. So ability to persevere in the face of potential adversity. That's grit. And then opportunity. We're also looking at opportunity. One of the things that when we're doing a college fair, I have 5 recruiters on my team who are out in usually 60 to 65 countries a year talking to students. One of the first things that we tell those recruiters as part of their training is that at least half of the time that you have a conversation with a student or their parents, you should be writing the names of 1 or 2 other universities on the back of your business card and handing it to them. We want to facilitate that good fit conversation. So yes, as much as I would love all, come one, come all to Indiana. We would love to see you there. What's more important is that we are good partners in that conversation with you, with your students, with your parents. Not your parents, I mean, they're welcome to come too, but the parents of your students. And I see that level of collegiality. I think you see it demonstrated here today, but broadly within the field, among U.S. universities, there is this sense of kind of where we're all working towards the same common goal of making sure that your students land where they're going to be successful. Another takeaway for you in that, keeping that in mind, is ask questions and trust that we're going to tell you if it's very clear that Indiana is not the right fit, or Florida, or Vanderbilt, or Pomona. Oftentimes we'll not only be very candid with you and kind of help you understand why that might not be the case, but we may also have very valuable suggestions as to some other institutions that through the course of our conversations, we know each other and things start to click and we'll say, they should not be looking at Indiana. They should be looking at Drury University or Drake or, Oregon State, who knows? So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, so very quickly, the admissions models. There are 3 kind of standard approaches towards admission. The first is open enrollment. These are typically at community colleges. Raise your hand if you're familiar with community colleges. The idea of community colleges, great. So really the concept of community colleges has to do with access. So it's a place where a student who maybe has had some difficulties academically, needs to transition, for whatever reason, oftentimes cost is a barrier. Community colleges are a great way for students to begin that journey towards a 4-year bachelor's degree. A lot of great, what are called articulation agreements, so kind of guaranteed pathways into institutions, especially in the public sector, but not just public. Great pathways from community colleges into our institutions. So key kind of things with open enrollment institutions is that they don't typically require strong academic performance. They won't typically require SAT or ACT, but it's a place for a student to go and start to undertake university level coursework and kind of prove themselves in that arena and then proceed. Threshold admissions or formulaic admissions is another term. Threshold, I think, is the more common. Those are institutions who have very public, very transparent, forward-facing admission policies. It's an if-then kind of situation. So if a student has this GPA and this SAT score, they will be offered admission. So it's very clear. Now, keep in mind that just because an institution has threshold admissions, that does not mean necessarily that they are not selective. That threshold may be quite high. So there are some public universities where state legislatures or boards of trustees have actually established a threshold whereby any student who meets that such and such standard will be admitted. But again, that standard may be quite high. So maybe selective, maybe a little bit less, but either way, when your student applies, they should know, will I be offered admission? Most commonly, what you're going to see, that's fine, yeah, is holistic. So that's what each of our institutions practice, is holistic admission. So everything that we've just discussed with you, we're looking at. How we look at that is very different from each of our institutions. So I'll be very candid and kind of start the ball rolling. I would love to hear from my colleagues, but at Indiana University, we do exercise holistic admissions, but we start with more of a threshold model. So the first thing that we do look at are SAT scores, ACT scores, and academic performance. Now, we do contextualize that academic performance, so we're also looking at your schools, looking at your grade distributions, the curriculum, and so forth. But we start with looking at those 2 key indicators, and then we start to look at essays, letters of recommendation, and so forth. Thoughts from colleagues?
Well, for us, we diverge that a little bit from that. And what we do is when that application comes in, the holistic and the academic are separated. So there's a group of people over here that are looking at the academic and determining that it's met the minimum threshold, 4 years of math, 4 years of English. They're looking at the rigor. They're making sure that they have the test scores. And then there's another set of individuals who are reading all of the holistic. So they're moving through the process simultaneously. They're randomly assigned. So this group over here does not know what this group over here who is reading which. And then after our file is called complete, once all of the holistic is done with that team, all of the academic is done with that team, then that file comes back together again. And then that's when we get our full picture of who the students are. And for us, we chose that process because there often are those diamond in the rough. And to see if you see a GPA or you see courses that maybe were not as rigorous as you would like to see, we don't want that to influence then how you look at their holistic portion, how you look at their essay and that information, or vice versa. You know, there's some students, they'll throw together a application in the last 30 minutes before the deadline, and you want to see, you know, how committed is this student? They really haven't done this. And then you see over here, they have these amazing coursework that they've done. So you know they can do a whole lot better than what the time and attention they put into it. So those are just some of the nuances. We're getting to the same end, but we're going at it in different ways.
And Zena, as a public university, are you held to a certain percentage, a certain ratio of residencies?
Yes. In the public four-year institutions, which are called the state universities in the state of Florida, our entire system, there's 12 of us. System-wide, we cannot be more than 10% non-Florida. So that's system-wide. There are some of my sister institutions that will never be above a couple of percentages. So then that leaves more room for some place like Florida that has much more attractive to a broader set of non-Floridians who can do more than that. This class that came in this year, we were like 17% out of state, which is well above the 10. So ours is based on our entire system.
So 50 states, 50 approaches. In Indiana, we are held to about a 55% enrollment of Indiana residents. So that leaves us 45% of the rest of the class to make up with international and other residents of other states in the US. And our funding, as Zena mentioned, is tied to that ratio. So that impacts also who's being admitted. That has nothing to do with the student. It has everything to do with the fact that it's taxpayers in our respective states who are essentially subsidizing education for residents of our states who have paid those taxes. So tell us a little bit, we're running out of time, so Adam, let me pick on you because John's going to be running a whole admissions workshop for us. Tell us a bit about your process.
Yeah, so our process is very different in the sense that we rely on territory managers, and so all of the world is sort of cut up and disseminated out to my staff. We have 14 admission officers at Pomona. Each admission officer has a section of the world. That section of the world, it corresponds to who and where I think they should be learning about and what I think they should be learning about, so they develop an expertise. So I travel in India, I read India. My colleague Joel travels in Canada. He reads all applicants from Canada. We assign all 50 US states. The applications then come in and they are read by those territory experts, and those experts then will say, out of all of the applicants from the state of Wyoming or the state of New Mexico, I am going to put forward these few candidates to be admitted. And then those students will go through a decision committee, just like international students as well. We have an international committee that I run. So all the students are read by the applicant reviewer who oversees South Korea. That person will then bring those applicants to committee and say, I've read the entire country, and these are the applicants I think that are the best. And so I'm going to pitch them to the committee. That territory manager pitches those applicants to the committee. Every committee at Pomona is an odd number. It's usually 5 or 7, and that's so that the vote isn't a split vote. We vote on the applicants, and you are admitted by that vote. So it's a discussion, deliberation, and decision committee. Then those students who are admitted by committee are asked to join the class.
So you see, it depends, right, between each university. But to Zena's earlier point, we're all getting to the same end, just taking different approaches. I will leave you with one illustration of an applicant that we had at Indiana University this past cycle who had a very compelling letter, actually several compelling letters of recommendation, amazing SAT scores, but we just weren't seeing in the grades the performance that we would have expected, especially in the areas in which that student was interested in. We had some conversations because we knew the counselor that had, so to each of you, your letters do matter. We knew the counselor quite well who had written one of the recommendation letters and was just kind of glowing, saying great things about this student. And so there was this odd disconnect that was happening. No student at Indiana, even though we're looking first at the academics, no student is denied before they go to our committee. So every student is read. And through that process, we discovered that disconnect. We reached out to the counselor. The counselor said, you really should have this conversation with the student. You should probe about this and this and this. I'll say that approach is always different as well. We reach out first to the counselor if it's someone we know. So then we contacted the student. Through the course of the conversation, the student disclosed a very significant health issue that had occurred and had been documented and had chosen intentionally not to share that as part of their application, even though at IU there is an opportunity to do so in the personal essay, or personal statement rather, that's separate than the essay. It was important that he be considered for admission in his mind, and rightly so, on his own academic merits. But in leaving out the context of what had happened during that year that he was dealing with that medical issue, it raised questions for us. And had we not known that counselor, had we not taken the step to reach out and then have the conversation with the student, this is an amazing student that we probably would have missed, who ultimately ended up getting direct admission into our intelligent systems engineering program with a scholarship, is doing great things. So I think that's kind of a good showcase of holistic admissions. We're looking at a lot of things, but ultimately it's that drive, it's what is that student gonna bring. We all want to say yes. We can't say yes to everyone, but we all want to. And so I think that's helpful for you to know kind of where our mindset is. Clay, anything else?
No, I think that's brilliant. John, you've unpacked it, as always, with such clarity and concision. We are going to make a bit of an audible where so one thing John and Adam and John and Zena have done is also, when we talked on the break, unpack some of the acronyms. So we're an alphabet soup of terms. And John, I think you were doing a great job there. Some of you asked me, what does IC3 stand for? So I have the perfect person, a leader who has been a real visionary in this sort of counselor advocacy and transformation, not only with India, but around the world. Ganesh Kohli is a great friend who has partnered with all of us and partnered with College Board now for many years, and we have tremendous respect for Ganesh. And we wanted you to be able to hear from Ganesh before we let you go to lunch, so he can talk about the more broad-based vision behind this collaboration. So Ganesh, would you mind coming up and addressing the group?
Good afternoon. Welcome to IC3. Well done, you made it. I think we deserve a big round of applause for all of us who made it. You know, as I got in and I said, Clay, this was supposed to be lunchtime. He said, Ganesh, we'll let you go now. And I said, you're going to put me between lunch and all of these people. And I mean, you know, the devil's role. But so that we have some energy added to this room, I don't know if you know, somebody was born today. Many years ago. We don't want to tell you how many, but somebody was born today. Someone who's been instrumental in putting this workshop together. So I'm going to invite you to sing Happy Birthday with me. Are you all right? Singing Happy Birthday? Let's see how good sing. I know you're all counselors, but so it's Clay's happy birthday today. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Clay. Happy birthday to you. Big round of applause for Clay Hensley. The College Board is fortunate to have people like him. He should have been with his family, vacationing in Hawaii or somewhere. Here he's leading a workshop in India with lovely people, of course, but thank you very much for being here. I want to just thank, firstly, our co-host, Ashoka University, for making IC3 happen, for believing in this mission of IC3. I also want to thank SVKM School, Shoma and Principal Swaminathan and Anudnya. Thank you for all that you do and for providing. There you come. You're going to live 100 years, Shoma. So I was just thanking SVKM for putting this together, giving us this lovely facility, looking after all of us so well. So thank you very much. And you actually, you begun IC3 with the first event of this week. So congratulations and thank you for being part of this family. You know, after James Bond, the other person who's well known in the education space is Clay Hensley. And he doesn't need an introduction. But Clay and College Board have been very supportive of this mission. And we appreciate your partnership. And we thank you for doing this now a third year in a row. You're doing 2 days for a third year in a row. So thank you, Clay, and to all our colleagues from the College Board that are here for making this happen. All of the faculty are wonderful friends who've traveled, and, you know, these are really busy people, by the way, guys, and I really want to acknowledge. I know some of them have done it like multiple years. Third year for Zina, third year for John. Obviously, IC3's got some addictive qualities. There are no drugs that we feed you. In fact, there's no alcohol at this conference as well. We're an alcohol-free conference. But people are addicted to IC3. You'll find out in the next 3 or 4 days. And they really want to be at IC3. And we appreciate all of our faculty here. I also want to just thank each one of you for being here. You know, your presence kind of empowers us. Can I have all the IC3 scholars that are here raise their hands, please? All the IC3 scholars. Can we have a big round of applause? We processed 396 scholarship applications and gave scholarships to almost 150 people. And we have 84 scholars here with us in Mumbai. And they're from 15 different countries. So this is about inclusion. I'm going to quote from what I will, I'm going to quote on Wednesday morning. But diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And we're all here to dance this week. Yes, and I invite you, all the scholars, to make the most of this week. You will meet some fabulous people and have a lot of opportunities to learn and to network. But, to each one of us who's made it to IC3, anyone in this room who's attending their 4th IC3 conference, 4 years in a row? Did you know this is the 4th IC3 conference? 1, 2, wonderful. I'm 3, and there are a few. And then I want to also acknowledge all of our committee members. Any IC3 committee members here? John Wilkerson needs to stand up. He's serving now for 2 years plus. thank you to all of our committee members for what they do and for their service. I don't know if you know about the grounding of the 737 MAX aircrafts. Do you know it's caused a lot of problems? All of us are aware of that. Now imagine if you let aircrafts, even, whatever happened with the engines and all of that, those problems. But imagine if I told you that there was an aircraft type with no navigation system in it and you had to keep it in service. Nobody is flying that plane. A lot of our young friends in school are leaving school like airplanes without a navigation system. You have faulty aircrafts in the air. These people are crashing into a world of despair, frustration, anger, disappointment. We at IC3 even found a correlation between road rage in Delhi and a lack of career and college counseling. We are finding that a lot of social problems, and we are not a platform for social emotional counseling, but we found enough evidence to show that a lack of career and college counseling is causing social problems in our world. And therefore, all of you are rock stars. You are virtually, particularly in India, but many other countries, a species on the verge of extinction. And we need to breed more. We need to make sure we have enough people in this profession. And that is the challenge that we've got in ahead of us. IC3 was not founded or not established as a platform to promote any organization, institution, or individual. IC3 was set up to bring career and college counseling in 176,000 schools in South Asia, but along the way, our friends from New Zealand have also joined. Where is Kubi? A big hi to Kubi. And along the way, we've got people in Mauritius join and people in other parts of the world join. But really, our only goal is counseling in every school and counseling for every student. That's our focus. And so there are three things that we are doing: sensitizing, glamorizing, and developing. We need to sensitize an entire community on the criticality and need of career and college counseling. We need to glamorize this profession so that enough ninth graders say, I want to become a college counselor. I want to become a career and college counselor or a teacher. And we need to develop enough people so that we have enough people to hire from. There are so many principals who call grudgingly on my phone, Ganesh, you did all of this, you have me by your side, but where is the counselor to hire? The same set of people. We are not about establishing power centers outside schools. We want to establish power centers inside schools at IC3. We are not about encouraging independent counseling. We want to actually make each one of you powerful enough so that your students don't go anywhere else. And when people tell me they're outsourcing their career and college counseling, I tell them, why don't you outsource your math teaching also? Why don't you outsource your English teaching? Why don't you outsource the principal's job? God bless your school if you're outsourcing career and college counseling. If there is a school building, there needs to be a counseling department. If there is a math teacher in school, there needs to be a career and college counselor. And we'll bring evidence for you. There's enough evidence to show that if you do this well, you might get a donation from one of your alumni and he'll build a building for you at your school. So we really have a lot of principals. I don't know if you know, but there is a presidential forum tomorrow. We have 169 people there. And most of them are principals, school leaders. So our work is sensitizing, glamorizing, and developing. And really, I invite all of you in this room to go from being participants to being change makers. Every voice that we can get behind the movement is critical for us. Every single one of you is so important for us. We need to go and stand up for this profession. We need to stand up for every kid. Career and college counseling is not for the kid who goes to Harvard and Stanford and MIT and Yale and Cambridge. It's not for the top 2% of our kids. It's not about going abroad. It's not just about leaving your home country. It is for every kid. And the bottom 20% need it the most. I belong to that category in school. I was failing all the time. If there was anybody who needed career or needs career and college counseling, it's the bottom half of the class as much as the top half of your class. So this is really about inclusion. IC3 is your platform. I invite you to participate, but also to be the change that you want to see. And a lot of counselors have written to us. We've had a lot of love come our way over the last 4 years. And they said, we suddenly feel important. And that's really what we want to see. You are important. You are the navigation. Nobody's taking off without navigation in the airplane. So once again, thank you very much for being here. We have a packed schedule. Don't miss a single minute at IC3. I promise you, your life might change at 4:50 on the second day, 10 minutes before closure. You never know. I don't know how many of you realize this. How many of us remember a doctor that you visited in class 8 or 7? Anybody? A doctor you visited in class 7? Or you're really unique. How many of us remember a teacher we met in class 8? Or wow, almost everybody, right? So, one of my grievances was I had a hard time getting married because, my father-in-law didn't understand what I did. I said I was a counselor, career and college counselor. And I had to explain what my profession was. Every time I went to these social gatherings in the evening, and there were these people who'd walk in. This guy is a pediatrician, and he's an ophthalmologist, and this guy is a chartered accountant, and this guy is a pilot. And there was so much respect and reverence, and everybody would be like so respectful. And then they'd ask me, "What do you do?" I said, "I teach." "Oh, really? Where do you teach?" We all remember a teacher from class 7 and 8 and 9. We are soul doctors, far more important than the body doctor. The body doctor touches the body, 5 days later you forget him. The teacher touches your life, 60 years you don't forget him. That's how profound our work is. So we are all in a phenomenal profession. Let's make the most of this week so that we can be the soul doctors back home, back in our schools, and we can impact our communities. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
So lunch is next, so we can enjoy our lunch. We'll come back. Give me 1 second. Well, so instead of 1:45, let's make it 1:55, and then we'll move on. We're going to isolate different components. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Right. So instead of 12:45, we'll give 10 more minutes. Is that enough for lunch for everyone? Great. So come back at 12:55, and we'll get started then. Thank you.
We have kept these 3 leaflets on your desk. Has everyone got it? Sure. This one is a feedback form where we are trying to understand whether you have a CEEB code. Basically, that's a code through which we recognize you in the college board system. So feel free to fill this up. It's very self-explanatory in terms of whether you have the code or not. If you don't have, we'll help you create one code. Once you fill up this form, we'll reach out to you with an email and an online link, which you have to fill up. And once you fill up that online link on our website, your code will be generated within 2 to 3 weeks. So please fill this up and submit it back to us on the last bench. There's a leaflet on our SAT suite of products, just for broader understanding in terms of what all we do broadly with the candidates and how we help you with our products and services. So just go through it. If you have any questions, we are here. And the last one is we are doing an event in October in New Delhi, where we are trying to bring in close to around 100 odd counselors from various K-12 schools, as well as 30 participants, university which accepts SAT in India, and our affiliate members across the globe, like MIT, Purdue and all. They will be here on October 14th at the Lalit. So for all your students who are interested either in going abroad or to study within India across these 30 universities, it's a good opportunity for you to meet face to face these admissions officers and deans and directors of this institution on that event. So we will send you all the details again on email, but this is just for your broad consumption that there is an event which is happening, which is helpful for you and your students. Please plan to attend. Thank you, Clay.
Thank you, Vikram. And just to note, Pomona is a founding member of this, and Adam has been part of that event before. I believe Adam is delegating it to Seth, that his colleague Seth will be there in October. So John, please take off.
All right. We're going to do a little mock exercise. You get to practice everything that we've been talking to you about today. I'll walk you through a few slides, and then we're going to have some case studies. We have examples of 5 different students, and then we'll talk about the decisions that you might render or recommend for them as admissions officers. So here's a question to start. With all that we've been talking about all day today, what is the one adjective that describes a selective U.S. admission process? Yes. Holistic. This is right. And here's the official definition. I think this one's from Merriam-Webster. Characterized by comprehension of the parts of something as intimately interconnected and explicable only by reference to the whole. So, said in layman's terms, taking all of the pieces of information that we request from a student to understand them in a different way than we might understand them if we were only looking at any one piece of that information. So holism is the watchword for this session, and it's what we'll be practicing as we go through the exercise here in a little bit. I want you to take just a moment to read this, and I want to be really clear about the exercise we're getting ready to embark on. In this exercise, I am deputizing each of you to be admissions committee members at Vanderbilt. Okay? So, and that includes you 3 up here as well. I know, it's what you've always wanted, all of you. If only. This would be a dream team. I can't even. So it's really important to get the frame of reference. What we'll be talking about here are decisions that were actually made at Vanderbilt now 2 cycles ago. These are real-world examples we'll be using. But in order for you to get in that mind frame, it's important for you to understand how we do admissions at Vanderbilt. And so this is the Spirit of Admissions slide that were you to visit our campus, or if your students were ever to visit our campus, they would see presented to them. To every visitor to campus understands what we're doing. For us, it's important for us to have an admission process that is as personal as it can be, even though we acknowledge at the very outset that it is both high volume and highly selective. To put numbers to that, this past year there were 37,300 applicants to Vanderbilt for 1,600 spots in our freshman class. We admitted 9% of our applicants, or about 3,400 of them, to yield the class of 1,605 students that enrolled this past week, okay? So we're looking at an admit rate of 9%, and going back to some of the things I said before, we're very fortunate in that we have an amazing pool of candidates, almost all of which could do the work at Vanderbilt. So this changes your frame of reference. It's not like we're winnowing people from the pool because they cannot handle the work. We're looking at their applications and then determining whether they are competitive in our pool. We're going to do our best to treat your candidates with dignity and respect. And most importantly, we're going to be reading their files with the notion of positive advocacy in mind. This is very important. In our office, we are always reading these files, evaluating these credentials, looking for the reason to include the student in our community. It would be a very easy thing, and there are places out there that do look for the reason to deny a student. Misspelling a word is not going to be the reason that a student is denied in our pool. These are young people, right? They're putting their lives out there for us to adjudicate in a way. And so we owe them that dignity and respect to look for the reason to include them in our community. So real quickly, just get those concepts in your head and we'll move forward. It's important for you to know what we evaluate in our process, and this is a list of those things. It's everything that we've just been talking about today. For us, for this committee, we are going to be examining academic achievement first, and by that I mean earned record. We care a lot about the rigor of coursework that has been attempted, about the achievement within those courses compared to what is available at the school that the student is coming from. We are one of those places that does use standardized exams. The SAT or the ACT is required at Vanderbilt. SAT subject exams are not required. And the writing sections of the SAT and the ACT are not required at Vanderbilt. We always view standardized exams in the context that they come from, right? So we know that achievement for students applying from India is very different than achievement for students applying from Kenya. Very different than students applying in the United States, and frankly, by different socioeconomic groups or ethnicities in the United States. So we keep all of this broadly available demography available in our heads. We, like the others up here, accept shared platform applications, the common application or the coalition application. And in each one of those platforms, there are going to be places for the student to provide a personal essay, for them to talk about their extracurricular leadership, activities, and engagement, and for them also to provide letters of recommendation like we've been talking about. In our case, 2 teachers and 1 counselor, right? So these are the components of the application that John led us off with and that Zena and Adam illuminated in the last 2 sessions. And now, for this exercise, you have some sense of their importance at Vanderbilt, okay? I will remind you in saying that for the purposes of this, we're looking to build a 4-year community. Students who come to Vanderbilt are required to live on campus for all 4 years of their undergraduate degree. So residential education is important, and that means that the content of the essays, the extracurricular activities, the ways they engage with our community, and what the teachers and the counselors have to say about them is slightly more important to us than it might be to some other places out there, because we're building a community where people will live together and learn from one another for 4 consecutive years, okay? Moving on, other things that we're trying to think about as we are evaluating these files, we care a lot about these adjectives, these attributes that you see here. And you've heard all of these mentioned at various points throughout the day too. We're interested in students who have an inquisitive mind, who are good intellectuals, who are innovative, who are entrepreneurial, who are collaborative, who have a strategic mindset. They know what they want to do. They might not know the path to get there yet, but they know what they want the outcome to be. They are service-oriented, they are problem solvers, and they're community builders and natural leaders. These are important things, and if you were to describe our student body, these are the kinds of adjectives we hope that would be used and that we are seeking to make sure are included. Now for fun, you are all hired as admissions officers at Vanderbilt. Welcome to the staff. Give yourselves a round of applause. We're going to spend the next couple of slides in training about how we would evaluate a file. At Vanderbilt, we use 4 vectors of review. These are real, by the way. I'm not going to share with you our scales or how you get to them, but I do think as mock admissions officers, it's important for you to know that we're really viewing the holistic process as having 4 main vectors that we're considering. I want to walk through each of them. The first is an academic vector. And here, as I was telling before, we're very, very interested in the achievement of the student as measured both by their earned record, their standardized tests, viewed in the context that is available to them, okay? So the academic achievement is one of the vectors. It's the first vector and perhaps the most important. We move on to something that's very broadly called the personal vector. And in this case, we're examining all of the pieces of the application to help us imagine what the student has done in his or her high school or community, the place that's important to them. And this category very simply tries to objectify the subjective, okay? We know that each student is coming from a different place. Each student has a different way of being. Each student has different opportunities to them. But what we're trying to ascertain through the analysis of the personal vector is some sense of how they have impacted their community and how their community has shaped them as well. And community in this case includes their family, their community of faith. It might include their city, their town, their school, their organization, whatever of the many communities they may be part of. At Vanderbilt, as I told you at the very beginning of the day, we have 4 schools that enroll undergraduate students. And so the next vector that we're assessing is the fit of the student for the school to which they're applying, right? So as we were describing before, we're seeking to imagine how a prospective engineer would fit with our engineering faculty, how a prospective teacher in Peabody College might have had experience in an educational setting, how a prospective student in the School of Arts and Science has a well-rounded or a very pointy kind of intellect, to use the phrase that Adam introduced earlier. And in the case of the Blair School of Music, do they have musical ability? And so all of those are aspects of school fit that we're concerned about. And then our final one is called an overall rating. And the interesting thing here is that while our scale is not important to you, the overall rating is entirely independent of the other ratings. Okay? And it's really an assessment of the student's likely outcome in our process and their suitability for our limited merit-based scholarship dollars. So you won't have to worry so much about the overall rating in this exercise, but I want you to focus on the academic, the personal, and the school fit. And at this point in time, I'd love for the 3 of my colleagues and panelists to talk about ways this might be similar or different to the kinds of evaluations that you're doing as you practice holism. Who wants to?
Oh, it's on, I guess. I would say at Indiana, the personal is probably not as weighted for us. And that likely has to do with part of our mandate, being a public university is a little bit broader in terms of access. So that access piece for us eliminates a little bit of that. It's certainly there, but probably not to the extent or the weight that Vanderbilt has put in. But everything else, I think, yeah, all the components are there. It's interesting to see them, from my perspective, looking into Vanderbilt, just seeing how the weights shift depending upon institutional type and mission. So it's all there, just maybe arranged a little differently.
This is exactly the point that I was hoping to illustrate, and perhaps Zena and Adam have others to add.
Yeah, it's very similar, except school fit doesn't really apply because we're admitting students to Pomona College. We don't admit you to a major. You're not admitted to a program. The major piece is just much less pronounced. And so all of the pieces, the academic, the personal, the overall, actually our academic and personal are also not connected to our overall. So that's interesting. But the admission piece when it comes to major or school, that's not even something we think about.
Yeah, that's the same for us. You're admitted to the university, and we actually have the process called critical tracking, which is over 4 semesters. And so you have the opportunity to prove yourself over the course of those 4 semesters in order to stay in that major for the upper division. So therefore, we're admitting to the university. So the school fit isn't there, but the university fit in the larger context is there.
This is great, and without even rehearsing this, you're beginning to understand that even though we represent 4 very different places, and we will practice holism slightly differently, as we'll see, the general tenor is there, right? We're all singing from the same songbook in this case. So moving on, how do we evaluate? I've mentioned a little bit of this already. So as we look at these sample cases in a few moments, I want you to think about the rigor of the curriculum, about the grade trend, and we'll talk about that in the examples, their relative position in class, their class rank if it's available, or if it's not available, what do we know about the distribution of grades? Standardized testing, we've talked about, essays, the level of engagement and leadership in activities, the recommendations, as we've talked about many times today, and then, just as we mentioned, the fit with the Vanderbilt School, okay? So here we go. This is really hard for you to see, so I'm going to read it to you. You will not undertake the part of our process where you're actually writing comments on the file. That would be unwieldy in a group this size. But I wanted to show this slide so that you could get a flavor, a sense of what our evaluators are saying and writing about these students whose files they're evaluating. Our process always involves two readers or evaluators, and the second evaluator can always see the comments of the first evaluator. But I want to read them to you just so you can get some sense of the kinds of things that I will want you to say when you read these files. Reader 1 writes, and I will tell you, these are excerpted from larger comments, so they're not always this short, but in this case, for illustrative purposes, this is what we did. Reader 1, a truly humbling young woman to evaluate. She crafts an amazing essay where she challenges familial prejudices and asserts her own individuality, a story about faiths colliding. A poetic example of what an open mind and heart can do in young people. Teachers and counselors praise her character, ability, maturity. Teachers feel more like the students with her as the teacher. Possessed with a poet's vocabulary and a scholar's skepticism, she is invested both intellectually and emotionally in each discipline. The second reader comes in and says, her open mind, her commitment to causes, and her truly inspiring writing all combine to leave me in awe of her as a human, much less as a candidate for admission. History Recommender calls her a, quote, architect of the spirit, and highlights both her, quote, eager intellect and her, quote, passion for social justice. VU would be exceptionally lucky to count her as one of her own. She deserves the highest consideration for any and all merit awards for which she has applied. So you see a slightly different take on the same application, right? The first one has done a good job kind of summarizing and giving really pretty emotional reactions to what they've read in the file. The second reader has taken a slightly more practical approach, saying, these are the things I like, this is a kid we should consider, this is a kid we should consider funding, right? So you see a slightly different tone in each one, but what we're trying to do is illustrate the very definition of holism here. We don't see any mention of her actual grades in the comments, right? Because we've got those on the transcript. We don't see any mention of her testing here, because we've got that in another place. But what we're seeing is a synthesis of all of the other pieces of the file, viewed through two uniquely different and human lenses, right? Comments?
What is very interesting about this, and this kind of gives you a public-private flavor, the state of Florida has what's called a sunshine law. So at the University of Florida, you would never write this down on a piece of paper. This is the Sunshine Law says that any documented information can become a public document. And so therefore, in an effort not to embarrass or shame any student or anything, you would not write anything in the file in this way for someone else to see. But the Sunshine Law says if you wrote it for your own personal notes, then it cannot become part of a public records request. So this is the type of writing that you would keep in your own notes. And this is what, for us, makes our committee meetings so rich, because that's when you can have the opportunity to say it. And as you're going through, and we have a 5-point scale that you're scoring the holistic on, you do not know what anyone else has scored or done for this. So it just gives you a little bit of a different flavor between a public and a private, and some of the kind of state regulations and guidelines that make how we manage holistic different between publics and privates.
I think that's a great example, and I want to clarify here. If the student was admitted at Vanderbilt and chose to enroll, all of these would be purged from her file because she made it in. How she got there becomes irrelevant. And so any of these comments that my colleagues, or maybe I, would have made disappear from the files of the students who actually matriculated at Vanderbilt.
Our process is the same in Indiana. Yeah, we actually have to use coding that is very generic through the process. Deny AQCD, for similar reasons. But so it's an interesting process where people are coming into, we call it the ARC, the Application Review Committee. They're coming into committee and they actually have notebooks where they've putting stuff down. So.
All right.
Yeah, ours are a little bit shorter than this. If these are excerpted, the charge I give the officers is balance the numbers with the narratives, and so every file has some numbers, every file has some narratives. So I want you to evenly distribute your language between the numbers and the narratives as you assess, and that the evaluation should be the launching pad for the discussion in committee. So all of our write-ups are read out in committee, and the goal is that those narratives actually illuminate tension in the file or excellence in the file or points of distinction in the file that you then sort of release to the committee so that they become the jumping off point for the discussion before the vote.
I love it. I love learning how we all do this. So welcome to the admissions committee. In the next several slides, all right, whatever. So welcome to the admissions committee. The 5 candidates that you're going to see, I will help you read through them. I recognize the screen is further away. They come from a variety of high schools, public and private. Their class sizes vary across the examples. There are applicants to all 4 of our undergraduate colleges, and all of them are regular decision applicants. In this case, let's also assume that they are all international students and that none of them are seeking aid, because that would put them off on a different set, okay? So moving on, this is application A. This is a student of ours, an applicant who is applying to Peabody College, interested in secondary education as a major, goes to an international school, is estimated 2% rank in a medium-sized class. Her marks are trending up. Grade trend is up. As time goes by, she's becoming a better student. Her SATs a 1490. Her IB predicts are 43. Her school fit, though, for secondary education in Peabody is average. So she's not an exceptional fit for the program. She has supportive recommendation letters that call her an active class participant and that she's helpful to others. She writes an average essay about her neighborhood in Delhi. And her activities include 2-year commitments as a peer tutor. She's in the National Honor Society. She has a part-time job, and she's been a 3-year volunteer and tutor at the Delhi Bhawana Center. Okay, so a very typical kind of applicant for us here. And I don't know how you want. I will bring these back up in a summary slide in a moment. Application B is to the College of Arts and Science. The student wishes to study the classics. From a strong national school, top 1% of a small class, grades are steady at the top, meaning he's always been a good student, and there he or she remains. 1560 SAT with perfect AP and SAT 2 scores. Remember, we don't require those. The student revealed them, so we'll use them.
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Even the stuff that you guys heard me talking about, recommendations, we don't require them. If it comes in, we're going to use it.
Yeah, right. This is a student who is in the most demanding curriculum, has a very strong school fit for the study of the classics. Is currently on a gap year, teaching coding and entrepreneurship at an NGO in the Himalayas. Quote from the counselor, quote, absolutely the most talented student I have encountered in 30 years. Teacher letters glow with praise for intellect and curiosity. There's an engaging essay about how the teaching experience has impacted him. When he was in school, he was head boy, he was editor of the paper, general secretary for Model UN, and had a summer job coding at an entrepreneurship center. So this is a student that we see often in our applicant pool. Application C, another one applying to the College of Arts and Science, in this case undecided. Also from an international school, estimated in the top 30% of a medium-sized class. The grades are trending down. The grades are trending down. 32 ACT, average AP and SAT 2 scores. The counselor reveals it's the least demanding curriculum that's available, and the student has a weak school fit, an average counselor letter speaking about classroom leadership, average teacher letters from history and economics that speak mainly to his or her helpfulness to others, a good essay about leadership role in orchestra and the art club, and the activities include 2 to 4 year participation in athletics as house captain for the cricket team. Cricket is not an intramural sport at Vanderbilt for what it's worth. Maybe we need to establish that. I don't know. Application D is another interesting one. Applying to the Blair School of Music, wants to major in classical guitar performance. The audition score assigned by the faculty was average, so he's a good classical guitarist, but not the best one they've seen this year. Strong national school background, estimated top 12% of a large senior class with the grades trending up. A 32 ACT, perfect AP and SAT2 scores. Very demanding curriculum with all A's. Average school fit, probably because his audition score was average, right? Going back to that. Letters of recommendation call her a strong class participant, include the most praise for how strongly she embraces and promotes community. Her essay is about volunteer work with the elderly. Activities are focused on music, including individual lessons, multiple roles in school ensembles, summer job creating a music library for her school, and some volunteer work with the homeless. Another pretty typical applicant for us. And finally, application E is applying to the School of Engineering, interested in mechanical engineering, strong international school background, estimated the top 12% of a very large senior class. Grades are steady at the top. 32 ACT, strong AP. IB predicts are 40. Most demanding curriculum, especially in math science, with summer research experience in hand. Strong school fit, supportive letters of recommendation, praise classroom leadership. The student takes initiative to learn more, seeks out resources, and helps others learn. Writes an average essay about turning disappointment into opportunity after not making a sports team. Activities include good leadership as house lieutenant and with research. So these are obviously very pared down examples, right? You can imagine that these applications would be 12 to 15 pages of digitized images. That's about the length of a common or a coalition application when it's all submitted. But we've done our best here in this illustration to kind of highlight the things that we want you to focus your attention on. But do imagine that you had many more pages to evaluate. This sheet is a summary view, and I'm really sorry it's not clearer. This is the point in time where I'm going to ask my three colleagues and Clay, if he will, to wander around. I'd like you each to take a few minutes at your table using this as and if you need to come close to look at it or come look at the computer to see it, I'd like you each as an admissions committee at your table to discuss what you would like to do with each of the candidates. Will you admit them? Will you waitlist them? Or will you deny them? Remember, 37,300 applications this year, 9% admit rate. These are all good candidates, so we need you to look beyond the numbers and decide what your dispensation will be. And then at the end, I'm going to call on some of you to tell us what you think. We've got, let's see, right now it's 3:49, so let's take till about 4:15. To do this. And if you need to come up here and see the summary and overview chart, please come up here. But begin your conversations. This is supposed to be over at 4:15, so we're only going to go till 4:10. Thank you. We can go a little longer? Okay. Sunshine laws. Yeah. Thank you for that. That was a great point about the sunshine.
I learned that real quick when I moved from Columbia College to Missouri.
I bet you
What
did,
are
yeah.
you putting in that file?
Yeah, we told them, if you're gonna write a file, whatever you write needs to be able to be read in open court.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So, don't write anything what you want said in open court.
It made me think what I had written in the Columbia College file. So I
Buddy.
the disciples of Peter still disciple.
Any other ones you have forgotten already? Oh, yeah, you can take it here. The application.
And so as you begin your discussions, I just want to make sure you understand my abbreviations in the third column for grades and GPA. You've got their reported rank in class. MD means most demanding. LD means least demanding. VD means very demanding. And then you have their grade trend either up, steady, or down. Yes. All right. Sit committee with me, please. All right. I'm sure you all found that to be an easy exercise, right? Okay. It's 5 after 4, so we need to move along pretty quickly. But thank you all for indulging in this exercise. I'm going to ask some questions of you. And you guys can play along too, but how many of you are inclined to admit all of the students? Because we believe in positive advocacy, right? We want all of them to have a great outcome. How many of you realize that's not realistic at a school, right? How many of you were not able to come to the conclusion to admit any of them? Was there a group out there that couldn't find one to admit? No? Okay, so let's just talk these through a little bit. Let's take the student A, the one that's applied to Peabody and education, with all the credentials that you see there. How many of the tables, and just you can raise your hands in unison or however you like, this is not an official tally or anything. How many of you voted to admit student A? A couple here. May I ask why? Why did you like student A? Yeah. Oh, yes.
Because I feel all of the components, which is very convincing for the student to proceed his higher studies as per my eligibility criteria. Yes.
How many of you, which tables might have voted yes? Okay, Zena's saying that when we vote, you should maybe close your eyes so you're not influenced by the others around you. There you go. Which tables out here would have voted to waitlist the student? Okay. And John, maybe you can pick a table and ask them why?
Well, I saw a lot of hands here. Who thought why? Oh, we have notes.
So I guess we decided to waitlist the student because on every parameter, that is essay, leadership, recs, was average. Although the test score was 1490 and he was in the top 2%, but we thought that we can wait for some more, the student can wait for some more time.
All right. And I'm assuming that other tables that haven't raised their hands yet would have voted to deny this student? Okay. This is what actually happened at Vanderbilt. He was waitlisted. And I will tell you, the reason this applicant was waitlisted is because the school fit was not as pronounced, right? Everything else was fine, just as you said, and in fact, really good, as you said. But that school fit, because we have limited seats for that particular program, we were not able to admit that student. Now, it's important to know that at my institution, we have used our wait list consistently for 28 years. Because we have a cap on our enrollment, so we have to build to that cap every year. So a wait list is not a forever no at my institution.
And
there's a distinct possibility.
John, can I just ask, in that case, what was the role of the faculty and the talent review in that case of deciding average fit for the school? And does that differ from school to school?
So the question's a good one. The authority for the decision lies within our office based on the training that we've received from the faculty.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
So they're telling us markers that we should look for in the application that indicate to them a good fit to be a secondary education major.
So
Right?
that's interesting because in my pool, if you submit a music supplement, only the faculty can review it, and our staff have no power to talk about music talent whatsoever.
Now,
So-
that's true at Vanderbilt too for music.
Yes.
Peabody's education. So we're not judging whether they can play the
Thank you.
guitar.
Okay.
Right? All right. Yes. So the school fit is, again, informed by information we receive from the faculty using a rubric that they have helped us develop. Yes, our school faculty. That's right. Okay, let's move on to applicant. We'll go back here to the summary. Applicant B was in the College of Arts and Science with classics and all of the credentials that you see there. Which tables in the room wanted to admit applicant B? That seems pretty unanimous, right? Okay. Was there a table out there that voted to waitlist applicant B? No? Any table out there that voted to deny applicant B? Zena, you're just playing. All right. Let's see what happened here. Applicant B was admitted. And it's pretty, we put this one in specifically because it's such a strong applicant on every front, right? And the kind of student that we often see from international backgrounds that really will add to the community on our campus. All right, applicant C. Who voted to admit applicant C? Anybody? Applicant C for the wait list. Okay, I think we've got unanimity here. Applicant C for deny. All right, let's see what happened. Yes. This is the very opposite of the last one, and the most negative aspect of this candidacy, the least demanding curriculum with grades trending downward. It's a very, very tough thing to overcome in a holistic process. All right, applicant D was our Blair School of Music person. So this gets to the point that Adam was making before. School fit, in this case, is absolutely determined by the faculty who are equipped to evaluate musical talent. I love music, but the way I love music is not the technical way that music is to be loved. And so the fact that this person had an average audition and an average school fit in our process is coming directly from the music faculty themselves who evaluate that. All of the other ratings come from the admissions office. Who voted to admit the student? Anybody vote to waitlist the student? And anybody vote to deny the student? A few here and there. This student was waitlisted. Okay? So the student was waitlisted, and I think the reason in this case also, and this gets to the peculiarities of Vanderbilt's holism compared to other schools, also probably tied to the school fit notion.
So,
okay?
John, one of the questions that came up in my group was, how do we know, if you go back to the rubric there on school, how do we know that it was a strong international school or a strong national school? What evidence did we use to get to strong?
So what we're probably looking at there is information that you as counselors provided on your profile, and also information that we're able to get from certifiable external sources like the College Board or ACT, right? How your students perform on standardized exams. But your point is a good one. It's a kind of a subjective adjective, right? But in this case, I would take it to mean, and we're talking about candidates B, D, and E all have the word strong. That tells me that somehow these are schools that have a track record of placing students internationally. Okay.
It's a good point as well. We track back to earlier this morning when we were talking about persistence, year 1, year 2, and ultimately graduation rates. Our schools try, I assume, everywhere I've been, we track performance by high schools, how those students are tracking through their degree programs at Indiana. So that has some weight. If we see a school that we know students from there are very likely to persist and do well, that matters.
Right, right. And then our final example was our engineering applicant, top 12% with the most direct demanding curriculum and steady achievement. Who voted to admit the engineer? Any wait lists? That seems okay. And anybody vote to deny this engineer? A couple? Okay, let's see what happened. Was denied. Now, let's talk a little bit about this. That's a really strong candidate, right? It's a super strong candidate, but at Vanderbilt, there are 325 seats for engineers every year. And so what I have to assume is that there were other students that wrote better essays probably, that were a little higher in the class, maybe that had better IB predicts, and probably had higher test scores as well. So this student, could he do the work? Absolutely. In the competitive milieu, he doesn't rise to the top, okay?
John, does Vanderbilt offer pre-engineering or any other pathway they have to be admitted directly?
They have to be admitted. We admit to college at Vanderbilt. Yeah.
And that's a point of distinction as well, I think, for counselors, as you, particularly in engineering programs, as you're advising students towards potential schools. It's a good idea to have a mix of universities, maybe one or two that do offer a pre-engineering pathway. Whereas others will be direct.
Well, and I think the way that Zita described how at Florida students are admitted to the university and then have the 2 years to determine which major to go, that's a
And
counterpoint.
John, in my conversation with another committee, they asked, what if he or she had applied to a different engineering sub-area? So is it mechanical that's particularly competitive? What if it's biomedical or environmental? Would that person have an easier chance? How would you know that?
So at our institution, the intended major would not matter in this case. The intended college matters, engineering, arts and science, Peabody or Blair, but the major does not matter except in Peabody and Blair. So it doesn't matter that that student said mechanical as opposed to civil or something else.
And John, is there an opportunity to transfer later?
Yes, yes. At our institution, as long as the student is in good academic standing, the student doesn't have to apply to move schools after the first year, right? So if you're advising a student who is interested in engineering, they come to Vanderbilt, they take the first classes in engineering and they don't like it as much as they thought they would, there's not a second application process as long as they're in good academic standing to move to arts and science.
How about coming from a different institution? Do you accept transfers?
Yes, and from a different institution, we absolutely accept transfers every year, about 220 of them every year. So thank you for playing along. That gives you a glimpse, and thanks also to John, Zena, and Adam for helping with this too, because while this was my school's particular flavor of holism, I think by having them going out about there and asking the questions and pointing things out, you begin to see that it's practiced a little bit differently everywhere. But again, the tenets are the same. We're all looking for students who'll be great fits on our community, in our communities. And sometimes, I want to just say this before we move on and give it back to Clay, I think sometimes, and especially in international communities, it can feel like the responses are scattershot, that they're unpredictable. And my take on that is that while it may appear that way to your families, the reason it appears that way is because each of us is practicing in mission according to the values and the philosophies of our campus. And what matters to me at Vanderbilt is different than what matters to Adam at Pomona and Zena at Florida, and John at IU. But the decisions we make sense for our communities and for our pools. So I hope that gives you some sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. That was an exciting session. So now that wraps up the day, and now did you have a question about the activity, or we're going to move on to open question and answer before we close? Well, that's a good way to kick off this open question and answer session. So, do any of you have quotas by international country, or how do you consider different countries as you read?
No quotas. What we do have is a limit of beds on campus, and we do have a sense of wanting to be global. And in order to do that, we have an outreach and admission strategy. But at the end of the day, my charge to my staff is default toward admitting the strongest students. And if the strongest students from year to year are in different places, then we will vary the admits we have in those different places. In the last couple of years, for example, we have had we've had some stronger students from Europe than we have had from Asia. And so we've admitted a few more students from Europe than from Asia, and the numbers have gone down a little bit on this continent. But I don't think that that's because we're not doing outreach or we don't have strong students. It's just relatively speaking, the numbers fluctuate a bit. But that has nothing to do with quotas. That has everything to do with the strength of the pool. Now, will that be the same this year? I don't know, because you don't know what the strength of the pool looks like until it's on your front door.
Well, I want to push you a bit on that, John. And Zena, if you want to jump in as well. But many Big Ten institutions, with a couple of exceptions, are heavily dependent on a single or two source countries. Are you saying that all things being relatively equal, it's not attractive if a student may be coming from a country that is not one of those two source countries?
Probably I can't speak for all of the Big Ten. There are institutions. The Big Ten is our academic alliance. Big Ten academic alliance, and it's us, Illinois, Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, some kind of peers geographically. Indiana is able to and has grown to size so that if we see a particularly strong applicant pool, we're looking at all non-residents, so all applicants not from Indiana on the same criteria for admission. So we look at a kid from Baku and a kid from San Francisco as exactly the same. And when the class size, to your point about beds or seats, when the class size is too big, we shut it down. And it doesn't matter what that mix is other than the 55% Indiana residents. I will say also, though, not to toot our own horns, but we are more diverse already than most of our, not most, but a lot of our Big Ten colleagues. So we are not as dependent on one particular country as some others. Yeah. But there are, to your point, Clay, there are peer institutions within the Big Ten that are 90% of their international population is from one country. That is not us.
You don't have the privilege
No.
or even both in your recruiting or your admitting, really look at geography as being
No, and in fact, our only mandate in that area is to continue to diversify. So hence, recruiting 65 countries, every inhabited continent each year. That is a charge from our provost.
Going back to what Adam said, that the pool, as the pool builds, it's an ebb and flow. So a lot of it is on the front end with respect to our outreach and recruitment that's going to create our pool. And then from there, that's when we really start seeing how this is playing out. Do we have more from here versus there, or do we see the trend changing? There's been a lot of ebb and flow in the last couple of years with particularly international applications to U.S. institutions in general. So we pay close attention to when we get to that point where the application is closed for this group, and then who do we have? And then we're guided by that more so than we have too many of these and not enough of those.
Well, as a private institution, we have a little more leeway and we don't have the legislative mandates that the publics do. But that said, we're going to be like Pomona in that we're going to be looking for the very best candidates. And each sending country's applicant pool will look different. So what is competitive for a candidate from India, for instance, may be very different than what is competitive for a candidate from China. Just to put the three biggest ones out there for us. The third one is South Korea for us. So, but the candidates that we're choosing from each country don't necessarily look exactly alike because the pools from each of those countries are different. And the same is true for U.S. states. It's hard to find a student from North Dakota. In the same way, it is hard to find a student from Samoa, or from Fiji. So are those things that we'll notice? Of course we'll notice them. But will their geographic provenance be the reason that we admit them? No.
I do think, though, I hear that as well. I think it's a common statement that's out there, and maybe this is.
I can anecdotally say that on one occasion I was chased down a corridor at an IACAT conference by somebody saying, "Hey, Kubi, we need a Kiwi."
Well, yeah. Good.
Most of the courses which were there offered by the University of Florida are familiar to us. But there are some universities which are offering diversified courses like art and all. And if the student who is seeking an employability, if he is coming to the country, USA, and if he is coming back after completing the courses, so is there any employability guarantee to the child? Or is the question I can ask in a different way. A student has gone for undergraduate courses. Whether he will be getting any kind of preference to go for the postgraduate courses in the same country. Or after he comes back, after completing his duration of the courses. There are so many courses which are there not available in India are being offered there. So once he comes back, how far his employability is guaranteed?
Well, I don't know that we make that deliberate of a straight line if you do that at the University of Florida. I think most of our institutions, we don't line up, if you do this major, you'll get this job and at this rate. It is far more, we have a very comprehensive career connection center that's going to take all of our students and look at their skill set and say, what do you want to do with this? And then help them to identify how you can apply that. Now, there are some that you look at and say, if we're going to be an engineering major, you're probably going to want to do engineering work. And so, therefore, helping a student to visualize what that is. We bring employers onto our campus. We have big events and fairs where they can connect and have interviews and things of that nature. But, so there are some professional degrees, business, engineering, that may have a straighter line. But I don't know that we approach it from the perspective that you came to this school and you're going to get that job.
What about for graduate work as they go from one academic level to another? If they're applying to Florida for some graduate schools, do they have an advantage of applying?
That's not necessarily an advantage. If you want to stay at Florida to do your graduate degree or do a professional degree or go on to medical school, it's all about what opportunities have you taken advantage of while you were there.
Other question.
In the academic curriculum when you are talking about, in India we have multiple curriculums, right, from a CBSE to an ISC or a state board. So how do you make a comparison of these boards? If a child who has got same score, maybe in, the rigor is very different in all the boards. So on one level, when we are comparing IB or we are comparing an A-level student, and then the Indian boards which are there. So how do you, look at these boards?
context again. How do you look at students from different curricular backgrounds?
Did you want to start there, John? You said
Sure. So I think this gets back to, if we remember this morning, all the components of the application that we're looking at. Curriculum is certainly very important, and it's weighted. It carries fairly heavy weight, I think, at each of our institutions. But it's not the only metric. So I think there were some questions from this group as well during the mock admissions exercise about how do you know which is more important than the other. And that's a very institutionally specific answer to give you, and it varies from sometimes year to year or program to program. But I think that we're not relying on just the curriculum to assess that student. And the thing to keep in mind is across all of those components of the application, again, alignment and consistency is important. So when we look at curriculum and the performance in the curriculum between this student and this student, they may be very different curriculum, but they're both performing well. The next thing we look at are those standardized test scores, and we see that they're performing well or equally within the context of where and when that test was administered within their plan. Then we look at recommendations, so each leads to the next, and as long as the story through that admissions thread in each of those components is consistent and matches what we're seeing against each of the other metrics, then we have every reason to trust that that student will perform as well as the other student that we're looking at in a different curriculum. It's when the alignment goes awry and we start to see that this piece of the application doesn't really support what we're seeing in this piece that we start to question.
Yeah, I mean, I would say from a territory manager model, I expect my staff to know what that looks like when it comes to the differentiated curricula. So a standard 10 or standard 12 curriculum, as opposed to maybe you start in the British system but you end in IB. As you jump from curriculum to curriculum, I am expecting that my staff understands that, and that is their job. The other piece of it is, if they don't understand it, they're instructed to stop reading the file and go find out the information before they come back to evaluate. Because evaluating something you don't understand is always going to lead to a bad decision. And I think at that end of the day, it comes down to training and staff expectations, but I know all of us as leaders of our respective divisions, we have training expectations, staff development expectations, and we spend a lot of time thinking about this in hiring and staff development.
Months. What we're showing you in a couple of hours, we spend months and years with our staff to develop. So, yes.
Yeah,
So if we have a student who is good in football or tennis or any sport, how would the application be different? I mean, what is it that a university would be looking for? Or should we be sending, a lot of parents prefer to send their students or their kids earlier than the 12th grade to the US. Would that be the right path? Or could we retain them at our school and then send them after the 12th grade?
That's a huge, it depends. If you're...
I was just going to start, I'm sorry, Zena. There are 3 divisions in the United States. The first question that you should ask that student and really try to assess talent is which division you are going to play in, Division 1, Division 2, or Division 3, because each is guided by rules and regulations, and the NCAA, which is the governing body, sets rules that all of us follow. And there are real particular ways in which students can actually, and coaches and teams can actually get into trouble if you don't do it the right way. So after you assess talent level and division, then I would say start having the conversations about whether you want to be a recruited athlete or you want to be playing in a non-division or non-varsity sport.
And also there are 3 associations. So NCAA is the association that's most well known and that represents, or that we're all a part of, but the NAIA is a lot of great smaller schools, liberal arts and sciences, are recruiting national level players. They also have 3 divisions and scholarships and so forth. Keep in mind, though, to the talent piece, if you're competing at NC, I mean, what I tell students who ask about being an athlete at IU is that if Indiana University had been its own country in the last Olympics, we would have placed 14th in the medal count. So you need to be competing at that level in order to be NCAA Division I. So I think setting those realistic expectations are important. Yeah, okay, here you go.
Most of the students that I send to the United States are athletes, and one of the things that I'm saying to them when they're considering Div 1 or Div 2 is they can make a choice, and there's no right answer, between maybe sitting on the bench more in Div 1 and getting more game time in Div 2. And some of them will choose sitting on the bench in Div 1 because they're going to get a higher standard of training when they come back to New Zealand. They're going to maybe be a better athlete and ready to compete. And others will say, no, I want to go Div 2 because I want game time from the beginning, and that's what's important to me. So I think it's the thing to talk to them about.
Now, just to clarify, were you asking about recruited athletes who are looking for scholarships, or were you asking the impact of having athletic accolades that could contribute? So, for example, being the captain of a cricket team, even if Pomona doesn't have cricket.
So obviously, I wasn't referring to cricket, but a person who's already playing at national level or international level wants to up the game, but also want education. So obviously, needs an undergraduate degree to support it as well. So both together.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and that also starts to get into eligibility areas, because if they're being paid as an athlete, then they are no longer eligible to be a student athlete. They can come to university, but they couldn't compete they could play intramurals. Oh, I am not the guy for sports. Yeah. Yeah, but I think that you also were asking about students coming to the States to finish high school, right? If that gives them a competitive advantage.
Compared to coming from India.
I have no idea. If there's a competitive advantage. That's good.
Them an edge for going into college sport.
Any other questions before we close?
Something I know something about.
There was a question out there about residency, so I wanted to address that question about residency. For the two of us, Indiana and Florida, it's very, very difficult to establish residency. Every state has a version of the question that asks, what is your sole purpose for being in the state? And if you say education, the end, then it's not going to be. That's the sole purpose, you're going to be there. In the state of Florida, in order for you to be considered for residency, you have to be in the state, not going to school, but in the state for a minimum of 12 consecutive months prior to the time you want to begin your education. And in those months, you must pay taxes, you must register to vote, you must do a third thing that has just slipped my mind right now. And that's just going to get you now, so we'll look and consider you. So it is very, very difficult to get residency coming into Florida solely for to gain an education.
And that citizenship piece is the clincher there. There's no state that I'm aware of that will allow a non-U.S. citizen to become a resident for tuition purposes. But, yeah, that's helpful to know.
How many of you work currently with U.S. citizens in your student enrollment? A few, okay. Yes.
My question relates to what my Kiwi colleague here was asking about with context and the question over there about curriculum. But it's a little bit more penetrating than that, because in this, context is important, but what I mean is in this room, we are all representing international schools or schools that have a lot of resources to have a counseling office. But I was wondering, You know, there are probably a number of candidates whose applications reach your desks who don't come from such lucky or such well-resourced schools. And so their applications might lack that certain polish, and the recommendations will also lack the polish. And I wonder, you know, the information that you can gather from these kind of candidates, in the case of what Mr. Adam was saying, you know, your regional managers would be in charge of deciding on these, but then the information that they're gathering is sort of imperfect, right? So do you take chances on these kind of candidates, and how, I guess that's my question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a wonderful question, actually. And the answer is yes. And I will say, credit to you all for doing all the work you do. And as you know, there are also many fine CBOs and NGOs that are doing really fantastic work with students in your communities and in your cities and in your countries, in part because those students do not have the resources and you articulated it really nicely, I think. And so, yes, we are connected with those kinds of organizations as well. I will put in a plug for Education USA around the world. We work with Education USA in countries sometimes that don't have counseling infrastructure, or where counseling is sort of a new emerging concept. They will often be those organizations taking those first steps in a country who connect with EdUSA, can often find us as resources. And we all travel, as John said, all over the world. We're all traveling all over the world as well. So relationships in that particular circumstance matter quite a lot. I think it was Audre Lorde who said, "You've got to go there to know there." And I think that is really true. Being on the ground in countries and understanding the differences among and between people and culture and places, that is an important part of our work in what I would call the education ambassador piece of our work, to be able to really facilitate conversations with those who may not have access to the resources to find us.
And I think an important point there that extends the question that was asked over here, but just to clarify that for most admission offices, and for you when you're choosing a curriculum, you should choose a curriculum not based on how universities will perceive it, but what's right for your community, what's right for your students. John, you're not comparing, even in the US, A-levels versus IB. You're looking at students within a curriculum, right?
Right. I think another way to say that, Clay, is that we're not making value judgments about the choices that you as administrators have made for your schools, right? That's not our place to do that. But it is our place to evaluate the candidates that are coming from the context that you've created for your students. So it doesn't matter whether it's AP, IB, the national curriculum, or whatever. If it is viewed as educationally sound in your community, we have to honor that to a certain extent. But then we have to take the time to learn why, maybe not why you've done it, but what a good achievement looks like in each of those different curriculums.
But some of what was said before seems to contradict that, because you were talking before about students being evaluated on their serious subjects and not on these sort of frivolous things like journalism or whatever, when they might be applying for a liberal arts program, and you know, how important is it that the student applying for a liberal arts program is doing senior chemistry or whatever, that is going to shut him out from, or her out from the courses that they really want to be studying. So they are having to make choices between whether they want to study what they want to study, or whether they're going to study what the universities want them to study.
Well, I don't know. My response would be, there is some foundational, whether you want to study journalism or engineering, we expect a foundational level of academic preparation. And from what we understand of success at the highly selective institutions, that stopping math after the 10th or second year is not going to put you on the right foot when you get to our campus. You will have 2 years gap of that math experience, and you're going to have math no matter what your major is when you get to us as part of our lower division, our liberal arts experience. So we want you to have a minimum level of preparation. You can know from, day one that journalism is what you want to do, and we want to be able to support you in that, but we also know our most successful journalism students have come to us with 4 years of math and have taken some statistics courses when they get on our campus, and all of that foundational work is what lays the groundwork for you to take journalism to the next level. And oftentimes we get questions from students, particularly in business, that they've taken an economics course or a business course, and we're saying that, I forget which my colleague said it, is the floor. We're going to push you way beyond that. So that is the floor, and it's not going to replace a lot of other things, but it is going to get you prepared to be there and where you want to go. So we've been at this for a while now, that foundation, we can't pull back on that on our campuses. It is needed for you to launch into the classics, into journalism, into psychology or sociology. We know that type of preparation will help you be productive and have a good experience. We don't want anyone on our campus that's going to be gone in a semester or a year. And those students with that foundational preparation are the ones that all of our research show are going to be the most successful.
And but the admission departments have put in the research and put in they have the expertise to evaluate and determine what demonstrates that. There's a variety of choices. It can be the CBSE curriculum to demonstrate that core. It could be AP Calc BC. It could be A-levels. I mean, and you don't make value judgments there. But within that curriculum, you make value judgments of who's really demonstrating the kind of skills that you want to see at your institution.
And I think that polish piece is, we know the students that are coming to us with polished applications and levels of support. And so when we see a student who has clear academic ability, but has not had the support in place, that doesn't mean that student is put on the side of the desk. It means that student has to be looked at differently than the student who comes to us with that level of support and polish. So if you remember that grit term, that's a student who really has done quite a bit to even get that application to our desk. No one is going to say no to that application without giving it a whole lot of consideration.
Yeah, and I would also offer that maybe the metaphor is a little wrong here, that way in which we're thinking about this, the way in which I train my staff is, this is not about stair steps or levels. This is about concentric circles. And so when I talk about the core, I'm talking about that innermost circle. But there's all sorts of other great courses like art and journalism and music and all sorts of things that are that next circle, that concentric circle outside of the core, that are also really, really important. And I'll tell you, the most common minor for a computer science student at Pomona is French. The most common double major of a physics student at Pomona is philosophy. We see these things as interconnected, interwoven, and I don't think that means we're prejudicing them in some way in the application process when we talk about the core. It just means that's what we're looking for in terms of recommendations, but it doesn't mean those other things are not important. They're actually very important, and we love to see students doing those kinds of things.
Okay, I have a question. There are two questions actually. So when it comes to the requirement of mathematics as a subject for students taking journalism or any art-related field, say psychology or other things, is there any grade requirement or simply passing grades, say for example, IB getting a 4 in a standard level course would be enough? That's one question. Second question is for journalism, where math may not be their key requirement, but I understand from your point of view that your statistics and background, your research says that math for 4 years is a good chance that the student will be successful at university. What if a student has done only 1 year of mathematics, like 3 years of mathematics, 2 years of grade 9, grade 10, and AS mathematics in A levels, and not the A2 mathematics? Would that be sufficient for journalism as a course?
We're getting so specific here that it's, there's not one pathway to journalism. And it's going to include the rest of what they've done. If you're saying journalism, was this student, have they done an internship during the summer possibly, or if they're working on the school newspaper, or they just like to write. You know, so those are two different views of what I'm going to need to expect from the student. The student who's been engaged in it for a while, I see them developing skill sets. The student who just likes to write, I'm not so sure about that skill set, so I might want to see a little bit more of something for that one. So there's always, it depends in that situation, because it doesn't, for the most part, our institutions are not A plus B equals C, or 1 plus 1 equals 2. It is one, what are the contexts of one, and what am I adding to it, and then that's going to give me that final.
And what competition does the student face for a particular program or even for admission into the institution? I want to be really clear. When I said before we're not making value judgments about curriculum, I mean amongst curriculum choices. We are judging students about the choices they've made within a curriculum.
Within their own context.
Right, right.
So,
So in New Zealand, physical education is an academically rigorous, science-based subject.
Exactly. That's exactly what we're trying to say here, is that we're going to look at it in context. We understand that, you know, what it may be in India may be very different than New Zealand, that may be very different in the United States. And so that's why this concept of context has been a common theme throughout the entire day. And that's why we can't say this plus this equals in, out, or neither. Because we have to take those nuances into consideration.
And the territory managers, which most of you who have a territory-based approach would be trained, would have that expertise to recognize that about New Zealand, or we mentioned the French bomb. We might not personally agree that a norm-based high school system is a great one. That's not the role of the vision officer to judge. They're going to take that into account. Even though I think it's silly to not have a criterion basis. But thank you so much. We're out of time. Next steps, we're going to provide you with the deck. It's going to include their contact info, so you'll be able to contact them. Also include information to contact me and Vikram and our other college board colleagues, as well as how to apply for our school vote and information. We hope that you do consider our upcoming event, October 14th in Delhi. And I'll include that as in the attendance, so you'll have information on that. You have a series of certificates and bags that will be part of the upcoming IC3 conference. I'm curious, though, how many of you will be part of the session tomorrow with this faculty? So most of you. So we'll get so you'll have other chances to engage and ask questions. But my IC3 colleagues, where did they go? Oh, I want to make sure that we have the right. How are they going to get their certificate?
So thank you for the patience. We would be distributing by calling out the names. Our student volunteers are going to help us reach the certificates in the back to your table. So we are trying to avoid any sort of chaos. But before that, I'd like to invite Shoma over here, because we've got a small cake for Clay's birthday today.
So SVKM International School is extremely happy to have been given this opportunity to host the forum for IC3. And it's been our absolute pleasure to have such wonderful people like you to come today. And of course, needless to say, what a wonderful learning opportunity that we have laid our step into. A huge thank you to Clay, Dr. John, Adam, Dr. Zina. I really appreciate all the insight that we have gotten today. And I'm sure that for all the week long that we're looking ahead at, the wonderful dinners that we're going to meet together for, and of course the networking. Wish you all a wonderful IC3 experience and have a nice evening in Mumbai today. Thank you very much. And if we can have the cake here.
Thank you to the school. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
They're going to call us things?
Yes, they'll do that. Yeah. So may I wish you a very happy birthday. Right, so now's the time. We all wish Clay a very, very, very happy birthday. All of us can do that.
I'm just calling out the names. Fine, let them go na there. Why you want to do that? So you have the coupons given to them. Oh, okay. Yeah. I have a small announcement, please. Okay, I think we all have received our bag coupons along with the lanyards, right? So as we call out your names, please pull out the bag coupon and come ahead and collect your certificate and the bag both. We're just trying to get it organized. So the first name coming here is Asha Khadka. You do one thing, one person. One person come here. You collect the coupons. You come on this side. Come here, come here, come here, come here. Prakash AG. Oh my God. Please, these are no photo sessions. Please. We just have to keep giving. Deep Tao. No photo sessions at all. Deep Tao. The coupon, have you given the coupon? The bag coupon? Daniela Varghese. What are you giving? This is Daniela Varghese. Don't pick up the. Thanks so much. Mahendra Thapa. Why don't you just put the thing in the bag and give it to them? We will not put it in the bag. I'm sorry if I pronounce this name wrong, but Nam Gno Than. Did I say it right?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sunaina Sharma. We have Sunaina Sharma. No, she's not there. Ramya Modukuri. Muktesh Kumar. Muktesh Kumar. The first one.
Vandana Dadi. Melvin Nifas. Give him the bag. Karen Krieger. Do I have Karen Krieger here? Hi.
Thank you.
Yasmin Abawarde. Do we have Yasmin? Niranjan Chandrapal. Do we have Niranjan Chandrapal? Give it. That is her. This is Niranjan. Can you give us the bag coupon? Okay. Sandeepa Verma. Eric Steer. Do I have Eric Steer? Eric Steer is not there. Put it up. No, it's not come. We are calling in the order of the name, please. Give us 5 minutes. Nasif Makaslang. Not there. Prasija Nambiar. Prasija Nambiar. She's not there. Nalini Chauhan. Lavanya Lokesh. This is Lavanya Lokesh. Wait. Grace Marshall. Here, give it to her. Joy Oinam. Okay, just give it. You just give it. Don't keep handing it here and there. It's creating confusion. Anuj Jain. Zareen Sabrina Chaudhary.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Priyanka Reddy. Priyanka Reddy is there. This is Priyanka Reddy. Seema Kaushik. Chiranjeevi Pandit. Do we have Chiranjeevi Pandit? Yeah.
There's one bag.
Yeah. Kubi Viten Hana. Kubi. I need your token.